Hi there, folks. Having a great day here at Four Corners RV in beautiful Durango, Colorado. Today I have the great pleasure of sharing with you a 2023 Safari Condo Alto. This is their fixed roof series. Their flagship is a smaller coach with a retractable roof. But here we have the second largest of their fixed roof series. It's a 2023 F2114. Their model numbers, as it compares to other traditional factories, are a lot closer tied to their weights. The 2100 references a little bit of their dry weight. Historically, this coach comes in at about 2,300 pounds based on how a customer specs one out. It can get down to the 2100. This coach, even at the high end with all of the specs that this client chose, is only at about 2,600 pounds. I'll go into a little bit greater detail in regard to what separates most RVs, and that is traditionally in their construction, and that is a difference between historically wood versus aluminum. That really makes a tremendous difference on what you can afford to tow in your current tow vehicle without having to change vehicles, SUVs, and trucks. So on this coach, I'm just going to dive into a little bit of the details. This is, again, a 2023 F2114. This coach in its entirety is only about 17 and a half feet, a little bit past that. In width, we have just a little bit past 7 feet. This is a couple's coach, I should say. Historically, RVs, no matter what you're looking at, whether it's motorized or towable, you can divide them into two categories. I use this terminology a bit loosely depending on who we're talking to, but a couple's coach means mostly built for one or two to enjoy. And what that is you have a tremendously large bed in the back. This is slightly larger than a king bed at 80 by 80 inches. And I share that all to say in a traditional RV, you have some version of a couch or a booth that is designed to serve as extra sleep space. So in the front of this coach, we can take our table and drop it down to allow you to sleep up to 6. But again, this is mostly viewed as a couple's coach. Opposingly, you have bunkhouses. Safari Condo does make bunk accessories. Some of their coaches do allow it to be called bunk. That gives you safer capacity to house more folks. So on that note, we're going to move on. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between wood and aluminum. All of the allure, folks, in case you don't know this is your first time, as it was for me a couple of years ago, finding out about Safari Condo, which I'll get into a little bit of our company's history with them. This is not somebody's traditional entry-level product. This is a stellar piece of equipment. Right now, the average wait is about 3 years. We're lucky here with our relationship with them. We've been dealing with their products for more than 5 or 6 years into our rental fleet. Durango RV Rentals, we operate about 18 to 20 rentals. 80 to 90% of them are coming from Safari Condo. They hold up tremendously well. That's for you as a consumer. That is for us as a business entity that puts these into the field. So we know the product well. We're hoping to become their first American dealership. That is entirely up to them based on their guarded nature towards their production. They build such a tremendous product that they do not want to ramp up production and get past themselves. So on that note, some of the tremendous differences when you look at products and how inexpensive a family can get out there and start camping has everything to do with the construction. So on this coach, this is an entirely aluminum construction. It is a 1-inch wall. This wall is all one piece, so the entire wall, the roof assembly goes from tip to tail. That is a 1-inch honeycomb extrusion. It is a branded product that they buy. I believe it's called Alumaflex or Alumafiber or something to that effect, but it is a one-piece component. It is a honeycomb. It has a tremendous R value for how small of a wall is. The other piece of this, and it's really in sharp contrast with most RVs are running an iron frame or a steel frame. In this instance, it is an aluminum frame. All aluminum frame, all aluminum construction allows folks to get out there camping. Again, 2,600 pounds is tremendous. The sweet spot, and the world definitely found itself identifying with lightweight coaches after COVID. The world was afire with RVs when they couldn't go on planes, trains, cruise ships and such, but most people didn't want to upgrade a tow vehicle. Having the ability to tow between 3,500 pounds or 2,500 pounds and 3,500 pounds is phenomenal, especially with the popularity and rise in gain with folks with electric vehicles and hybrids. So on that note, everything about what is driving the price point to where the weight is has everything to do with all aluminum construction. So we have an aluminum frame on a 3,500 pound independent independent suspension axle. It's a particular branded product called FlexRide. FlexRide is a patent pending from company that again is dramatically different. Most RVs traditionally it's going to be a leaf spring. It is a very inexpensive way of absorbing energy. When you have an independent rubber suspension, it just really protects the valuables and assets of your coach going down the road. We're going to do most of the tutorial on the exterior of the coach before we get into the interior. As you see, I have the awning on and the lights on. I'll go into greater detail in regards to functionality of awning and all the individual parts, but we're going to start from the front of the coach. I'll just quickly tell you again, we have the great pleasure of dealing with this product, but on the dealership side, we're not a seller of this product. We have them in our rental fleet, but we are an import and export license holder through Canada, so that allows consumers who do buy directly from Safari Condo, because that's the only way American consumers can purchase. When you do buy directly from the factory, they can choose Durango, Colorado as a delivery point, and that allows us, as you're seeing here, we're inside our shop. We're in the tail end of doing a PDI. PDI stands for pre-delivery inspection. This is where we go through the components just to ensure they're working. This product brings people in from all over the country. I think this is destined for California, but we have delivered coaches across America. So they arrive here first. We spend a little bit of time with them, making sure all components are working, and that's when we invite the folks out. This video is designed to be informative for anybody entertaining an RV as for purchase, entertaining an RV for rental, or really just to better understand one of these, considering that the demand is tremendous, but the supply is rather limited. On that note, we're going to move forward and begin teaching from the front of the coach. We'll eventually work our way around back. All right, folks, starting from the front of the coach, or the A-frame tongue section of the coach, we're going to concentrate on a few of the most important things. The propane section for most folks is where that if they haven't camped before, it might cause them a bit of concern. I can't help but brag on how efficient this RV is. So when it comes to a very commonly asked question, how long does propane last? Of course, that's going to be subject to your utilization, the climate, and where you camp. But these are two 20-pound tanks. When I discuss the propane, I'm going to start by discussing the fact that with two tanks, you do have the ability on your propane regulator, which there is a little arrow here. It's embossed on your direction device that allows you, again, to isolate. You have the ability to drain tanks independently. You also have the ability, if you decide to leave this in the middle, to drain from these tanks equally. What most people find as a disadvantage when you drain from the tanks equally is that there's no reserve. So should, in worst case scenario, you find yourself at the middle of the night and you've run out of propane and it starts to get cold, there's no backup. So what traditionally most folks choose to do is if you turn in the direction, this arrow is pointing to this tank, so this tank, we're going to make sure is open. This tank, I'd prefer to leave it closed. Now I have the ability to drain solely from this tank on the front of our regulator. There is a sight gauge. It's typically green for present gas flow or red for when I'm run out. Now I've got the ability to drain from this tank, and should, again, in worst case scenario, we run out in the middle of the night, I come out here and simply move this over, and I know I've got 50% left. These things traditionally last for months, folks. It's just, again, very hard to describe how long it's going to work for you. So now, when we discuss the swapping out the bottles, there is a convenient, manufactured by Safari Condo here, a locking mechanism that allows these bottles to be swapped. The only reason that I'm going into this detail is in a traditional RV, you'll sometimes encounter fault codes or error messages on propane devices. And what that usually is if you have air in the tank from swapping out a bottle. So when we get to the interior, especially the kitchen, I'll show you how to clear any air bubbles in your propane. This is done through your stove. So I'm going to put this back on. This is solely designed to keep these tight and secure in transit. And again, that covers the propane system. When we get into the interior, we'll discuss some of the safety features, especially around the propane and carbon monoxide sensors. Moving on to the batteries, what we have here is a lithium battery system in a very well fabricated and secure metal enclosure box. This metal enclosure box does have some safety screws that they do provide on the interior with all of your accessories, the security bit that you would use for a tool or a drill bit to remove this, but folks, you hardly ever are going to be into this box. This is a very easy system. It doesn't require any maintenance, unlike a traditional lead acid battery. You're never going to be refilling the liquid in here. So the things of importance when we get to discussing your batteries will have to do with a little bit of your battery cutoff switch, which we'll show you on the interior pass-through compartment, but everything about a lithium battery and this added value, because it does have an increased cost, as in most things related to an RV, come with its weight. So it is a really lightweight battery, but how long it's going to last and provide energy is just tremendous. In the first version of lithium batteries, a lot of folks were apprehensive. As these things have evolved, they now have self-heating elements in communication. that can speak to device in case you're ever needing attention. But the majority of what is discussed when you have lithium battery, and again I describe it relative to its battery disconnect, has everything to do with its ability to get down into cold weather temperatures. So for a lot of folks that becomes irrelevant, but here in our market, you should never have the ability to take a charge when you're below or at 0 degrees and below. You can disconnect this. If the batteries were full, you still have all the ability to utilize that battery and stored power. You just can't provide power to this. Now, like a lot of things in the RV space, I'm gonna just provide some additional detail, or we'll provide further videos or links, but I'm not gonna go into broader scope on this because this is mostly a maintenance-free item. And if you've spent the money to have a lithium batteries or upgraded your current RV, this should be, again, something that you set it and forget it. So moving on, we're gonna just quickly discuss a few other things in regards to the A-frame tongue. Everything about the connection points I'm going to save for a latter part of this video when we actually connect it to the vehicle. So I'll discuss your connection points, your safety chains, your 7-way, and your tongue jack a little bit in greater detail later. Moving forward, there's 2 things before I go to our off-door side, or 3 things as I look around. I'll just quickly point out, should you choose from Safari Condo, because there's lots of things that this factory allows you to do in regards to choosing and speccing out the coach. In traditional RV manufacturing, there's very few choices that you'll have from the factory. So should you choose to go with the bike rack, I'll describe it in a couple of ways. I'm not going to remove this. This is a customer-owned unit that we're preparing for delivery, so I'll let them utilize this for the first time. But there's a pivoting function that allows you to remove this and tilt it forward when no bikes are present, that allow you complete utilization of your front window. And then, of course, this portion folds down and allows you to strap your bikes on here. I will only reference, again, getting close to describing some of the data that's provided on your RV here, the importance of understanding your tongue weight. Your tongue weight on an RV and moving safely down the road has everything to do with towing capacities. Most people in towing capacities, they focus in on how much overall weight their vehicle can haul moving laterally. There is a bit of sensitivity regarding your tongue weight, and your tongue weight on your vehicle is either going to be described as bumper weight on a traditional passenger car or SUV, or load carrying or cargo carrying suspension in regards to a pickup, bumper weight or hitch weight, forgive me. Moving on, I'm just going to reference that we do have these data tags here. The data tags come from the factory. They do go into greater detail, as I alluded to earlier, what the overall dry weight of this coach is, and in regards to what your total allowing cargo carrying capacity is. These also have your VIN number, your manufacturer date, tire pressure, and a few other pieces of information. So we just encourage you to keep these clean, because as dirt settles in on them, they become hard to read and a little bit difficult to remove. The last piece that I'll focus on in regards to the front, because the window will go into greater detail on the interior, has everything to do with this corrugated plastic, or coroplast it's referred to. This is one of the brilliant things that Safari Condo has done in regards to protecting this beautiful finish. This, for most folks, if you don't already know it, this is going to be a baked on finish that comes from the factory that produced this aluminum metal, but this does continue on. Now, most traditional RVs, because you catch a lot of your bumps and bruises and traditional rock chips as you're going down the road, they traditionally have, and this is all at the cost savings benefit of the factory, some diamond plate. In this instance, you do have a metal finish because this is a one-piece unit. This forward component goes clear to the rear of the bumper, so this is one piece, and this is fabricated and shaped to form. But this piece of corrugated plastic, if I had to guess, in any market is probably $5 or $10 worth of plastic, but the amount of protection it provides, really easy if you ever had to get in to remove it in case this was damaged. There's just a couple of set screws, there's 2 on each side, and then you can slide this out of its track mechanism. But just a really inventive and inexpensive way to protect your coach. So moving on, we're going to get to the off-door side. Folks, picking up from the off-door side, in technical terms, I'll describe this as off-door side. Most people, in thinking in passenger vehicle, they'll refer to this as a driver side. Insurance adjusters, if there was damage, they would refer to this as ODS. So off-door side, I'm going to do the best I can in keeping to it. as I would describe moving from left to right, you know, in some version of top to bottom, since most of these things are a little bit more at user level, it's really from low to high. But starting with what I'll refer to as our pass-through storage. Traditionally, most RVs at the front end is your cargo bay. On certain RVs, you do have the luxury of having a cargo compartment door on both sides. Again, this is thus the reference of a pass-through. In this instance, because we do have our, what I'll describe as basement air conditioner on the other side, your cargo compartment storage is only from this side of the coach. You do in all of your storage compartments have access from the interior, so you can gain exposure to any of your equipment that you're looking for from the inside. So in this instance, one of the things that is hard pressed for me to ignore is when we look at this door system, it does have some visual identification that this is currently in the open position. I'll describe it a little bit like when I taught my kids how to drive. This is hands on the wheel, so at the 3 and 9 o'clock position is an open. When we get to locking it, which I'll explain in a minute, you're gonna see it at a 6 and 12 o'clock position. So when I talk about, as most things tend to have, is a bit of a pros and cons, this door is so good at keeping weather and temperature and water out that it sometimes becomes problematic for folks that have any carpal tunnel or arthritis. So I'm going to explain how to open this door. I'm going to just quickly ask you to listen because there's a bit of an audible click. And when I get into that, I'm describing what again becomes some folks' limitations. Because I have to press inwards and I have to do so both at the same time, I'm going to be pressing, I'm going to turn my back just to show you that I'm pressing, which I'm pushing forward motion towards the door, and this is where I need to get my fingers behind. So that is in an open position. I'm going to describe a little bit about the storage compartments and a couple of items that are in there, starting with they've done a tremendous job at Safari Condo of making really clear itemized description points in regards to capacities. So in this instance, you're going to see that the storage capacity for this vicinity is at 75 pounds. This is, again, not a complete pass-through. So in just this lower quadrant, again, accessible from the interior because you can push your booth seating up to gain access. A couple of things that I'll discuss before going into greater detail. Some of the items that are kept in here, this one will describe on the other side. This is a dust cover for storage when it comes to your basement air conditioner. The things really important inside here have everything to do with the battery system as we described earlier in the lithium battery. I'm going to show you here in a second how to turn that into the position for disengagement. In almost every storage compartment and just how their floor is, they have a cut to form piece of the same flooring. This is tremendous because it allows for really easy cleaning of your coach. So as you see here, these are bolts and access panels, and so these are really easy to gain access to clean. I'll put this back in here, and then we're going to get into the most important feature in here, which has to do with your battery disconnect. For the folks that have chosen the Safari Condo with the Caravan mover, you also have the power disconnect that allows for engagement of that system. It's not present on this coach. It would be mounted here with the visual. So to close this slam baggage door, I'll lock it in a moment. I only want to spend a little bit of time and concentrate on where the placement of your landing gear is. Landing gear, forgive me, is also referred to as stab jack, short for stabilization. The importance of the landing gear, I only really want to emphasize, has everything to do with it's never meant to be load bearing. These are not placement jacks to lift this coach in regards to a flat tire repair or any other maintenance. So these landing gear or stab jacks are mostly, as the consumer would describe, is to take some of the squishiness or the buoyancy off. So when you're set up at camp, lots of folks, such as myself, if it doesn't bother you, you can utilize the coach still attached to your vehicle in transit. You don't always need to use the landing gear, but it certainly helps. So one of the things about this, and it takes me back a moment in regards to just the sum of all parts. In RV manufacturing, as I alluded to earlier, when it comes to this component, they have some version of a good, better, best. So in the placement of these landing jacks, sometimes the suppliers do vary, and on these landing gear, you sometimes have a different mechanism. This is the more common. When I describe that as sometimes you'll see a piece of rebar that is particularly crimped, and the female portion to the tool or the manual device here is going to look a little bit different. But this is by far, in my opinion, probably the most common. And what this allows for, folks, and I would very much encourage you as an asterisk here to double check the manufacturer with this, But a lot of folks, they're going to, in an effort of avoiding some of this manual behavior, they're going to buy the same connection. This is a 3/4 drill bit, very commonplace for almost everything on an RV. They'll buy one of these attachments and put it on a drill. And so now out at the campsite, you have the ability to go up and down much quicker. But for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to show you. So you have 2 landing gear or front stab jacks mounted. These are at a particular angle. And then there's a reference. Most mechanical things, especially with how long they've been referred to this way, it's referred to as making ice cream because it's a manual crank system that you're having to do. I do not have in front of me one of the Lego blocks, as sometimes they're referred to, but some of the landing pads, you know, a lot of folks in the care of your own equipment, you're going to try to avoid mud and dirt. So depending on how soft the ground is when you're lowering one of these. And so once this connects, the typical reference here is really not more than snugging this up. Now where this might vary is you're doing some of your leveling, has everything to do with, you know, what method you employ to landing. We have a rental fleet here under Durango RV Rental, and we provide, I believe they're referred to as a torpedo level, a small sort of carpenter's level. So if you were using a carpenter's level, I might have this compartment open. I can rest it here. They're magnetic often. Some people in the RV space, they'll buy and affix these because you can mount these with adhesive all over the coach. So the importance of having this level comes into a lot of play when we get to this coach, especially a coach that has a propane refrigerator. Being level is about the most important thing you can do to ensure a healthy lifespan on your propane refrigerator. All right, folks, that is a completed mechanism. Landing gear raise, most crucially important, of course, when you're taking off. The last thing I'll just share when it comes to the landing gear is my particular favorite of having a manual landing jack. In the world of trying to alleviate some folks from doing things manually, we look at awnings, we look at tongue jacks. Everybody's in a rush to go to electric components to make ease of life or ease of use a little bit easier. But in the world of the landing gear, I'm just such a big fan of the manual because accidents do happen. In high wind situations, it could push and bend on that. Unfortunately, sometimes you might forget, and in your camping, if you're not following a close checklist, you take off and you depart, and now you forget and you've bent the landing gear. The reason I like the manual is that it's such an inexpensive replacement. It's just typically 4 screws, 4 bolts, and you replace these individually at a relatively inexpensive cost. If you had an electric set of landing gear, not offered by Safari Condo, I just worry about some people thinking that that again is designed to lift the coach and they overexert that mechanism. So now I'm going to show you the locking mechanism. Again, I'm going to place this down for just a second. Opening this up, I'm going to close this, back to slam baggage. I'm going to show you the keys. And so in this one, this is a branded product from the company called Thetford. Thetford is also known for toilets as a more common item that they manufacture. So using this key, and I'm going to reference the color-coded nature. So this is where, as you now see, it moves into an upright position of 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock. This to me is a visual identifier that I have a locked mechanism. All right, folks, continuing on with our off-door side tutorial. One of the things I failed to reference earlier from my perspective is, again, a lot of folks refer to off-door side as driver's side. I'll look at this as the business side of the coach. You have entertainment on that side, which we'll cover. On the business side, continuing on, this is where service and connection points often are found. So outside of propane, for some folks, a lot of anxiety about first-time campers has everything to do with the waste connections and your connection points. So I'm going to spend a fair amount of time regarding how simple, because once you comprehend this stuff, it should cause you no anxiety. So how simple it is in regards to your connection points. This is going to be the black tank. Black tank is solely connected to toilet and toilet alone. Then you have your gray tank connections, and the connection from the gray is plumbed solely from your sink and shower. So when you think about the waste that these things are going to generate, this gives us an opportunity for me to talk about tank capacities. Tank capacities on this coach is going to be 26 gallons of fresh water. Fresh water we'll get to when we look at our entry point. But when it comes to the black tank capacity, I'm pretty sure, and we'll double check this, we'll put some verbiage in the lower section. On the black tank capacity, I'm pretty confident that this is at 19 gallons, and then your gray water capacity is at 12 gallons. We'll double check that. So when it comes to utilization of this, I'm going to start by describing the connection point. This is regards to a bayonet fitting, or this is referred to as a bayonet fitting. Bayonet fitting, in most times at this outlet or the female portion of this, you're going to see 4 tabs. These tabs, as compared to this dust cover, as I'll refer to this, or just your connection cover, you'll see it has 4 connection points. These connection points allow you to grab onto that post, and then as you turn, sometimes, and don't be alarmed, a lot of the connection points for the bayonet fittings to hoses and any other accessories, they might only have 2 connection points. Nothing wrong with that at all. While I have this in my hand, I really want to talk about the importance of this in regards to what is commonly overlooked is this little bit of rubber band. That rubber band is designed so you don't lose it or leave it behind. But what some people fail to realize is that when they're closing this device up, if they happen to capture that rubber band and crimp that rubber band when they compress this, it's going to become very difficult to disengage, and sometimes you'll find yourself needing a tool, and if you don't have a pipe wrench that large, it becomes difficult. Again, the bayonet fittings, this is a brand new coach, and one of the things that I really want to emphasize is the utilization. This as a Y valve, where these 2 valves come from the drain tanks. This is something that does have the luxury to help gravity drain your liquids. You can depress this and push this down. In transit, I prefer you keep this up. It helps keep liquids, for any drips that remain in the holding area, from falling out. But more importantly, you're always looking for as much ground clearance as possible in transit. So now when we look at this, and this is rather safe for me to do because this is a brand new coach, as I mentioned, we're back inside our shop. This is being prepared for the delivery. So the black tank in your sequence is typically the first thing you want to drain. The black tank, as I referenced, has everything to do with the worst of the accumulated materials coming from the toilet. So the black tank, once it's drained and your hose is still connected, this allows you, mostly for cleanliness and hygiene, allows you to close the black tank. This is called a gate valve. I'm cutting off the circuit. No more liquids from this black tank are draining. And now this allows me to utilize my gray. Now, if you think about what your gray water is, your gray water has mostly to do with, as I referenced earlier, your sink and your shower. This is typically going to be a soapy material. And what happens now is that as I'm draining, again, this would be focused in a downward direction. As I'm draining that gray water, this allows you to feel more confident that when you disconnect your waste hose, you're not going to be as repulsed by the materials that have just passed through there. And then, of course, that adds the added value of in transit, that hose reducing any odors it provides. So now this is, again, the sequence of black tank first, close black tank, drain gray tank. Now you close your gray tank, and this is where I would typically bring this back up. I'm going to now put my dust cover, as I refer to it, back on the bayonet fitting. I'm going to turn this, it's compressed, this is loose, and now I'm in good shape for transit. So moving over, I want to talk about from the factory here, they do provide a connection point for the waste hose. I will also tell you a little bit of our experience running the rental fleet and what is common feedback that we get from customers. So from the factory, this is one of the tubes that is provided. They do a phenomenal job of marking some of these things to let you know, because without those markings, as you'll see here, it's very difficult to know where the entry point is. But as all things, I referenced this a little bit earlier when it comes to the pros and cons. So when I describe pros and cons, what is provided from the factory here is what I might refer to as a starter hose. My suggestion has a lot to do with leaving this inside the container and the housing for this and keeping this as a backup, and I'll explain. What might be obvious to folks that have camped before is that this only has one connection. I referred to this earlier as a bayonet, and without taking out of the package, you see there's only 2 fixtures here. I mentioned earlier that more commonly you'll see 4 fixtures. So when we look at this, the reason that I'm less happy with this that comes from the factory is everything to do with on the other side, it doesn't have a connection point. And what this means is that this really becomes important to possibly have some help out in the field, depending on how far of a distance you have from your coach. But the preference is such that I would encourage folks to potentially upgrade to a larger hose system. I'll explain a little bit more in detail as to why. But when it comes to this, it's just that the larger hose systems, especially with some of the connection fittings, don't fit into that device. I'll explain a bit more. For now, my recommendation is to leave this as a spare, because otherwise you're forced to manually hold this into the ground. There's certain campsites and certain state laws that prevent that, where they want it permanently affixed, held to the ground connection point. So I'm going to put this back in here. I'm going to move on. And I'm going to simply talk about the refrigerator, or at least the vents of your refrigerator. For me, on the external side of a coach, I can tell a lot about what's happening on the inside by components, fixtures, and so forth. So when we talk about the refrigerator vent, I'm just going to quickly describe that this is mostly for maintenance only. If you don't have a problem, you really shouldn't be spending much time in these compartments. I'm going to quickly just describe from this section only something that I alluded to earlier when it comes to using one of these leveling devices. The leveling devices, as I referenced earlier, are often magnetic. When you're looking at the landing gear, as I said, you want to have some reference to it being level, but this is mostly for your own comfort. When it comes to the life expectancy of a RV refrigerator, that one of your sources of energy being propane in this instance, it's tremendously important to have this level. So when I look at this, again, it's very easy to paint the picture. You can utilize this here. If you don't have a level, one of the common things that people will do is often a simple clear glass or clear bottle of water, putting any type of liquid, because most things have a liquid level to them. I would describe that the entry point of the door is a good starting place to see how close you are to level. When you get closer to level, I would encourage you with that same bottle of water to put it on your refrigerator, because as I referenced, the refrigerator is the most important thing for its life expectancy to be level. I'll do my best to explain it. What you do not see behind this wall in between these two vents has everything to do with the heating element that's required to have a propane fridge produce cold atmosphere for the interior. And as best I'll try to describe is a little bit like a lab with a condensation happening, that it is heating up this, I believe it's an ammonia-like liquid, but then it travels and it needs to condense at the highest side and come back down as a liquid form. So if you envision something that has this angled tubes happening back here, if it's off level, it might not make its way to that highest point, and you're going to get some error messages in the field. Your refrigerator isn't going to cool, and most importantly, it's going to shorten its lifespan. You're overexerting it. I have heard that there is some tolerances to about 6 degrees off center. I'm just going to encourage you as best you can to get this centered. It really helps the life of this perform better. So then on that note, I'm going to continue to move on. One of the things that I failed to mention, and it becomes a bit most important when it comes to storage, winterization, and it's down below near our waste vessels, has everything to do with the freshwater drain. In winterization, you really want to make sure that all of the water is depleted from the system. There's a lot of ways to do that, but it very much starts with draining your fresh water, because your fresh water, unless you pumped it all out using your onboard pump, and even then it's not the best method, you need to drain. As I referenced earlier, I believe this was a 17-gallon tank fresh water. When people are picking up from us, I'll very much have the discussion, do they want to leave with fresh water or not? I'm going to take a quick sidebar to describe that in a traditional RV, which is when I entered the industry, and having not been exposed to the quality of an Alto, I would never encourage somebody to travel with more than just a few gallons of water. When you have holding tanks that get up into 30, 40, and 50 gallons, water at weight is 8.33 pounds per gallon, and it becomes very a disadvantage when it comes to transportation. You're adding and exaggerating the suspension to the coach, and then also you're limiting your miles per gallon. So in a traditional coach, I would encourage you to keep about 5 gallons of our water, fresh water. This allows you to wash your hands and flush the toilet a few times in transit. And if you're going to a campsite, I would encourage you to get your fresh water as close to that campsite as possible. So on that note, when we display a coach or when we're doing our tutorial, we always have to have some fresh water in the system so we can teach and demonstrate the onboard systems are working. But depending on where the customer is going, we might often need to drain this. So on that note, I'm just going to quickly bend down in point 2. Behind your tire, you have your PEX plumbing. The blue is indicative of a cool water. And this one I'm just going to show you, but this one should have next to nothing in it because it's currently in that winterized form. And in fact, what it's hard to see here is a little bit of the pink tint in winterization. You're typically going to add a glycol or antifreeze. This is a food grade antifreeze. It's very safe for humans and dogs. but it does have a pink tint to it. And so this again is a winterized system. I'm just going to close this back up. Folks, before we move on to the back, I only want to make mention back to the fact that this coach is entirely capable of being spec'd out to your own desire. One of the things that this client did, and I would probably encourage it, building off of my reference earlier, that this is the business side of the coach. In the industry, these outdoor lights, I believe they're referred to as a scare light. I'm not sure where that originated from, but I'm going to refer to this as just my exterior light. There's an interior switch that controls this, but this is an addition that you can choose or not. So I just absolutely love this, because if I'm doing any of my maintenance or servicing of my campsite in the evening time, if I arrive late, having this light on my off door, or as I refer to business side, is a tremendous benefit. I think it's very much worth your while to entertain that. All right, folks, picking up from here on the remainder of the off door side, or again, I'll refer to this as the business side. Just got a few components on the lower section here. I'm going to start with the power, because the three things that I would describe that typically I keep referring to first timers that have some concerns. Again, it's propane, it's the waste section, or the drain valves, and then power. This will give me a chance. I'm going to pull this out of our storage compartment here to talk about this. My reference there is it's borrowed from other industries. This comes from boating. I don't want to pretend to know too much, and as I've referenced earlier, a lot of the things that I'm going to ask owners, especially when you invest in such a high quality RV, to do a little bit more research on your own. But my reference to shore power coming from my own anxiety and fears when I got into this industry, and I'm a guy that's pretty comfortable with electronic components and fixing things around the house. The shore power reference comes from the boating world, that it allows me a bit of security and safety should it be raining outside. For the first 2 weeks of my career in the RV space, I was scared to plug in an RV. Now I'm less concerned. I will share with you a lot of folks, they're going to also tell you to not be concerned about plugging in this portion in to at a traditional RV park or pedestal with that breaker on. That breaker being live caused me concern early on. It doesn't any longer. We're not going to do a live demonstration here, but what I am going to talk about is the fragility to this plastic and how it connects to the coach. A little bit about this light. When I reference not doing a live demonstration, as you can see, I'm not plugged into anything, but this light here as a component, I'll refer to this as trim level, because you'll sometimes have RV connections that do not have a light. But when you do have a light, LED light, it's a tremendous benefit to understanding when you have troubleshooting issues. So as a starting place, I'm going to tell you that this is, again, I'll describe it as a dust cover, some sort of protection cover. This is a 30 amp coach. 30 amp coach, when it comes to the plug that's in my hand, is a 3-prong plug. When you have a 50 amp coach, this is a 4-prong plug. The best way in layman's terms to describe the difference between a 30 amp and a 50 amp has everything to do with the amount of power accessible. Most commonly, you're going to see this described as a single air conditioner RV is a 30 amp coach. When you get into larger coaches with 2 or more air conditioners, it's a 50 amp coach. When it comes to a 30 amp coach, again, the reference here being a connection point here. When I talk about the fragility, if you had to replace this, you're probably $100+, but a lot of times I see these things broken by what amounts to just a few dollars worth of plastic in this collar. So one of the things that they didn't do in this instance that I have seen done is taking a black magic marker. I'll encourage you to do that with a Sharpie. What I'm getting at is this lower connection point, this being the female, the male is connected to the body. This lower portion has a bit of a keyed slot to it. So similar, when we're down there at the waist connection holding tube, you saw the white markers that tell me where to connect. The best way I would describe it is if this is my 12 o'clock position, I'm going to approach the coach what I would describe as a bit of an 11 o'clock position. So again, if you have a magic marker, you can indicate this for yourself. But if you approach here, you're going to find it fits. You're doing a slight turn. I'm going to let this out of my hands here. But this is where I talk about the fragility of this collar. This is where it's really important not to cross thread this. So on this instance, once I have it engaged, once I have it turned to the right, I'll be as delicate or gentle as possible to make sure that I'm not cross threading this, because this is what's going to keep this taut or connected with enough tension to the RV that it doesn't cause any separation. Because sadly, if this thing cracks on you, most people are not going to choose to replace a $100 cord for just this small item, and they'll make attempts at amending this or fixing it. But then when it doesn't have this tension or connection point, you run the risk of getting loose. The worst thing that you can do there is during air conditioner is have it disconnected. That is one of the absolute things that you want to make sure that you do not ever disengage your power source while your air conditioner is running. That is another way to help shorten the lifespan of one of your more expensive components. So in this instance, again, I have a connection point here. This becomes a little bit irrelevant of its location, but now I'm just going to get into quickly describing the benefit of that LED light. The LED light is a polarity check. Oftentimes somebody is having trouble with an RV and they don't realize, because it's very easy to blame the RV, that the problem might be external of the coach. I describe this as a pedestal. The pedestal is where you're going to be connecting this to your campsite or at your home. And when I connect this, if I have faulty power, I'm going to not have an illuminated LED light. This is again telling me when I have a good connection, because you'll get weird things at display. You'll have some lights working, some not. You'll have some appliances working, some not. Most often it's going to be front of the coach working, rear of the coach not, or vice versa. Sometimes it's left or right. This is all tied to how the coaches are wired, tied to the breakers. So you really want to make sure before you use any functionality that this light is connected. The other thing that I'm going to quickly share with you, and I'll point out to how thick of a gauge this is. Whenever you look at wiring, how thick the gauge is everything to do with its preventative issues towards overheating. You run a lot of energy through these cords and it has the potential to overheat. The reason I discuss this is because in most camping, one of the accessories that is either provided by the coach or you can purchase is some version of a connecting point. They look a little bit different depending on the supplier, but this is where I have the ability to connect this from my 30 amp connection into technically what is referred to as a 15 amp connection. I'm going to refer to this as traditional 110 plug. Everybody, we're used to this at a traditional home and residence where this 110 plug allows me, without any amending to the side of my property, to plug in. I'll come backwards only to talk about safety. If you're utilizing this, you don't have the same capacity as far as enduring power. Most often when someone is using this, they're using a traditional residential extension cord, which is a much thinner cord. It doesn't have the same gauge capacity. So I just share with you, please be mindful of how much power you're running through this. This is mostly a convenience device. The two most common reasons that you would employ this is to have the ability to charge battery, put lights on, but the most common is probably to cool the refrigerator. In a perfect world, if you're departing, you really want to cool your refrigerator on 110 power so that you're not depleting a lot of the propane that is required before you depart. Whenever you have a propane fridge, which I'll discuss a little bit greater at length when we get to the interior, it is important that that refrigerator be cold before you put any consumable items in there. And in the perfect world, you really want to put cold items into the refrigerator. Don't expect the refrigerator to do that heavy lifting. So being done with this, I'm going to disconnect this. This goes back into the coach. And then again, being gentle, I'm always going to pull up on this plug to help alleviate some tension. I'm going to spin the collar counterclockwise. And then if you recall that little bit of turn, typically it doesn't take much tension to simply just pull this out, but I'm turning a little bit to the left and pulling this up. We're going to put this back into our storage compartment. I'll take a chance to remind you, both storage compartments have the same capacity. It's marked on the door, 75 pounds in this area. And then most of that has everything to do with the performance of the coach. If you misload the RV when it comes to where you place some of the items you bring along in transit, you want to make sure that they're evenly distributed. Otherwise, you run the risk of wearing out your tires incorrectly. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to demonstrate the utilization of this. I'm only going to point here because we're not going to do any connection points. So one of the things that I'll start with when we look at this as a locking mechanism with the door, if I'm using, as I described earlier, city water. City water is nothing more than a traditional garden hose. The traditional starter kits in the RV world, that garden hose is usually color-coded as a white hose. You can use any hose, but I would give you the guidance of keeping that consistent and making sure it's only utilized for the RV itself. So bottom line is you have two connection points here. The first one, and we'll do a close-up on this, is going to be your freshwater tank. Your freshwater tank is going to, as I'll just show you from this direction, when we open this up, this is going to be a larger vessel. The freshwater tank most commonly is going to be using the same garden hose if I'm attached to a spigot and I'm filling this up. to the lower left of that, there's going to be a little bit of a breathing apparatus that helps avoid a lot of back pressure. Most commonly, my observation is you'll know when you have a full tank when the water is coming back out. I'm not familiar with anybody who is really dependent on the water level monitoring system outside of seeing capacity of how much I might have used in a camp trip to see if I've filled this up properly. When it's full, it's going to back pressure and flow out. But the other benefit to having this in case of necessity or an emergency is anything that can put into here. So some folks, you're going to travel with the funnel because in case you needed to fill this in the field with the 5-gallon vessel or bottled water in case of emergency. I'm going to close this fresh water up, and then I'm just going to simply expose the spigot connection. This is just like anything attached to the side of your home. The thing that I want to talk about here, and we'll do a highlight or a link or a picture, is when you're on a pressurized system, city water. It's tremendously important. They do have an indicator sticker here that, again, we'll do a close-up on, that reminds you wanted to use a pressure reducing valve or pressure reducing accessory. And this is something that is going to fit in line with your hose, and bottom line is this allows you to reduce the pressure. The most common number that you'll see affixed to one of these pressure reducing valves is 40 to 50 PSI. It's very uncommon. Most times when you're doing a pressure test on your own residence or anywhere else, you typically have numbers that are well below that. Moving on, this coach does have an exterior shower. Let me remind you, most coaches do have exterior showers, but in the Safari Condo world, you can choose to omit this or not. So in the RV shower, it is, I'm pretty sure, this smaller black plastic key. The larger black plastic key, again, a reference to Thetford earlier, that is my storage compartments. It does have its own number. In the smaller black plastic key, this is my outdoor shower. Before I display my outdoor shower, in fact, I'm going to take the keys off. I'm going to open this up only to point out, and hopefully the camera is going to catch this, the backside of the corded or braided cable that the plumbing attached to, as you can see, is in here. The only reason I reference that is sometimes as it's giving me a little bit of resistance now, is if it's coiled unto itself, it might present a little bit of resistance. I only remind you that you have access here in case it's obstructed. So on that note, proper utilization of this as an outdoor shower. There's some folks, and I do believe with Safari Condo, you can buy an exterior accessory package that goes with the shower that mounts here that gives you some external privacy. For me, I look at an outdoor shower as a convenience item, washing sand off of your feet, maybe washing a dog, just having access to the exterior water. Let me remind you, as I described earlier, whether we're talking a window, whether we're talking a shore power connection, these are all components that the factory bought. They bought them off the shelf. Again, trim levels, they could be good, better, best. On a lot of entry-level product, they're buying this same fixture, but sadly you get a surprise that only cold water is plumbed to the exterior. In this coach, both your hot and cold water is available to you externally. I'll share with you that you can utilize this in this direction. There's something about the feature of this, which, as I referenced earlier, in the RV world, there's typically a pros and cons. This plumbing has the ability to lock and engage. This is a water fixture that now, when I've engaged that lever or trigger, this is going to be constantly plumbed. If I had pressurized water, now is where I can begin turning valves to provide me the source of water I want, whether it's hot or cold. I share this to get into a slight disadvantage. Because of this locking lever, I'll close this. This is going to be one of the things that on this coach, it's tremendously important to not travel with your onboard pump on. I'll point to the pump when we get to the interior. There's a couple of other reasons why in this coach it's not advised. But because of this, if I had my lever for my onboard pump on, or if I had my switch, I do run the risk of utilizing water when I don't want to. So on that note, I'm going to remind you that the way you disengage this is push this forward. So again, when I want it to be on and dispensing water, when I want it to be off, I push in here. So in transit, I'll remind you to keep this off, but should you forget, the backup is going to be on the interior, making sure that switch is off. You'll see I'm gently trying to feed this in. Maybe the camera is picking up some of it here. From a close-up, you'll see that there's a female or circular receptacle that allows this to be connected. I'm just going to simply catch this in here. And then now it allows me to close it up. It is a small black plastic key. Now closing this up. I'm going to close our storage compartment. This concludes the rear portion. We're going to move on to the rear of the coach. We're going to cover very few items. It's mostly just the landing gear that is attached to the rear. So moving on, I just want to talk about the landing gear. I referenced this earlier as a stab jacks or stabilization. So in that instance, I had my manual tool. If you recall, when I discussed on this particular mounting gear that they have a 3/4 jack, I referenced that you can do it with the drill bit. I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of both. This becomes a particular area that becomes beneficial to having the drill bit. I'll explain. Because of the depth and how far back these landing gears are recessed from the bumper, having such a long, I forget the reference, I think this is called a speed drill or speed twist, something to that effect. This one you're going to hear, and eventually you'll see some marking here for where it typically is, I don't have a better word, but clanging against this bumper. So as I go down, you're going to see 3/4 bit. I'm trying to match this up. And once I'm connected, you know, I'm used to banging against this bumper as I'm now exaggerating, as you see, but this is where I'm utilizing this in an up and down fashion. I'm just going to quickly take advantage whenever I can of using a speed drill. I hope I have it in the right direction. I'm very much going to encourage you to be careful with this. In comparison, this is only about expediting the process. Traditionally, when you have anything in manual capacity, it's very easy for the average person to understand when they should stop. If you were using this manually, again, my reference earlier to after it touches down, just provide a little bit of resistance. When you're using a drill bit, especially an impact drill, it becomes a little bit easier to overexert the equipment. So on this one, I'm going to be rather gentle with my throttle, so to speak. So after it gets down, this is the important part. Once it touches, I really only want a bit more snug. Earlier when I referenced, as I'm doing now, I only have one jack down. I don't want to over-exaggerate or work real hard at making sure this particular jack is at a particular place, because it might be over-exerting the coach, and I might have to, dare I say, disengage or lower this a little bit later. So my best guidance is after you lower them all down, double check any measuring device that you have to see how you are in level. Then you can come back and snug these up. This is, again, a completed, dare I say, circuit. It's completed connection. It's down to the ground. I'm going to reverse this on my drill and bring this back up. And you'll notice how much quicker and how much easier it is than it is to do manual. On that note, similar to the drain, I would very much encourage you never leaving home without this. If you do decide to go the route, having a 3/4 fitting, then please make sure you always have this as a backup. Otherwise, you can be caught in a pickle in case this runs out of battery. Folks, moving on to the door side, or what I described earlier as the entertainment side, this is where you're going to spend a whole lot of your camping and making memories. We're going to talk about most of the components. We'll finish up by the awning. Right now, I have the awning out in display. But working from, again, left to right or from tail to tip, we're going to talk about a storage compartment. I've already gone into great detail. Slam baggage door, 75 pounds, really good functionality. I'm not going to bother going into detail here. When I get to wrapping up the awning, I'm going to walk you through and explain that the awning, with the legs that are holding this upright, have the ability to work in another position, and that's what these buckles are for. There's one here to the right, there'll be another one to the left, and that's just simply when I'm using the angle of those arms, having some resistance off of this coach, and that's what supports that. For right now, they're held to the ground, just nothing more than gravity, but it does come with some tent spikes for you to adjust. When I look at the rest of this coach, obviously a really good, beautiful window here. This is the kitchen area. But most of what we're going to discuss is just some things. I just want to point to them. I'm not going to go into tremendous detail. In this instance, this is the vent for our Truma Combi to be specific. This is probably one of the best devices that I fell in love with in appreciating this coach. Again, every device that ever get bolted on, you have a choice, good, better, and best. This is the best I've ever seen. It serves two purposes. That's your water heater and your house furnace. I'll describe them on the interior, but nothing more than a vent. Here we have a track mechanism that serves as an outdoor table. The same table that is on the interior, that is in your dining booth, that also internally doubles as sleeping. You can move that table and utilize it externally, and that's a good feature. So on that note, nothing more to describe here. I'll share with you how that table works when we describe on the interior. One of the things that I'll point out, referencing again entertainment side, is you have an external 110 plug. When you think about this and having a 110 plug on this side, that's for television, that's for a blender, that's for any apparatus you want, this only becomes functional, and it'll allow me, as I should have done earlier on shore power, give you a brief reminder of the things that you have access to when you're connected to shore power, meaning a traditional campsite, versus when you're not. I'll start in reverse. When you're not connected to an RV with shore power, you're going to be lacking three things. Your first is your air conditioner. Your second is your microwave, and your third is anything that plugs into a 110 plug. So when I'm doing off-grid, boondocking, or dry camping, I don't have those three things. I can utilize the coach for everything else that is run off of propane or just 12 volt. 12 volt between the lithium batteries and the fact that this coach has solar, pretty much going to never be without the ability to camp. But again, this only is going to function when you're plugged in using your shore power cable, as I described earlier. So this is a convenience. Obviously, it's located in conjunction where this table is for any cooking or entertaining. I'll quickly point out on the tires, these coaches, since they do come down from Canada, unlike a traditional American-built product, most coaches of this size, when they leave a factory, they're already towed by a professional driver down to the retail establishment. And what that means is already some mileage logged onto the tires. These coaches are being delivered by flatbed. They typically come 2 or 3 at a time. So I share that all to say there's been no mileage attributed to this. On that note, during our PDI, which is called our pre-delivery inspection process, we're going to double check and torque those tires. I do believe the torque is 100 pounds. But what the factory recommended instructions are is after 100 miles logged on the road, sometimes you'll hear reference to 50 miles per hour, you really want to re-torque this and make sure it's at 100 pounds of pressure. I share this because this comes back to the point of a flat tire. These coaches do not come with any of the tools. I think this is a 19 millimeter, but I can provide additional details in the video. So on that note, 45 pounds of pressure is recommended as per factory specs. That's how it's going to leave here in delivery, 100 pounds of pressure and torque. I'll only take a chance, especially on a single axle coach, to remind you, when I say single axle, you have two tires touching the ground. Historically, most people, one of the greatest dreads they have in RV ownership is ever a blowout. In my mind, blowouts are absolutely a preventable issue. This has everything to do with understanding a healthy tire, having a lot to do with where you store one, how much sun fade, how much dry rot these things are exposed to, how much tread is left. Understanding the tread depth is really important. But as I alluded to earlier when we talked about the storage compartments having 75 pounds of capacity, in this particular coach you do have 4 separate storage compartments. This one I'll share in a little bit is a very small one, but you really want to make sure your belongings are well distributed. I'll give you the best scenario and the worst offender to traditionally causing someone a blowout. Imagine someone who's trying not to run with any propane. I think California might be one of these states where you're not supposed to use propane in transit. This refrigerator does allow you to use 2 other sources. But imagine someone who opens this up and puts a big cooler full of ice and beers and drinks. If I add a few hundred pounds to one section, it's going to unevenly wear those tires and create a bit of a problem. So please just be mindful to the storage and what you load. So on that note, we're just going to continue to move on. I'll cover windows and the utilization of windows a bit more on the interior. We're going to move over to the front of the coach, and I'm just going to touch on a few other items. Earlier, I had brought up something that I've now installed, and I can at least demonstrate. When we were talking about the off-door side storage, I talked about this as your basement air conditioner. Basement air conditioner is only in contrast. Most RVs have a roof-mounted air conditioner. This is something that you typically don't see on anything other than the largest of Class A buses. So this is a tremendous benefit because I've seen lots of people shear their air conditioner off in low-hanging tree branches and things like that. So on that note, you have a basement air conditioner. Also, I'll just quickly reference, we'll go into greater detail, this also serves as a heat pump. So that means it generates heat from the same device. So in your air conditioner, this piece of coroplast, I referenced this earlier regarding the front, how it protects the finish. Corrugated plastic, built or manufactured in the same process as cardboard. So cardboard is corrugated board. Corrugated plastic, this is the reference to that protection. This is just cut out to prevent much dust going into your air conditioner. So on that note, this is mostly utilized for in storage. We'll take this off, we'll put it back inside our storage compartment. Coming back again, this is the other reference I'll demonstrate as far as these legs to support themselves will be used here. We have an inverted as compared to the earlier slam baggage doors. We have an inverted. There's only one lock mechanism, and so on that one I'll just quickly share with you, but this is some small storage. 25 pounds is now indicated on this door, so we're mindful of that. As you see, some of the other weight on this front corner has been occupied by the air conditioner. Couple of other things. We'll get into the stair, we'll get into the door. I gotta love certain of the ingenuity that Safari Condo has done. Earlier I talked about, I'm going to go into greater detail when we talk about this awning, how much I love things that are mechanical. When certain things are electric in the RV space, you always got to contend with when you run out of power. What I'm getting at is some of their ingenuity. They did fabricate this doorstep, I'll explain, but I do really love how simplistic. I use this terminology a lot, but the male and female connection point to their door grab. I'll start here. Of course, I'm going to go into detail regarding the entire door assembly, but what I'm getting at is that if you listen, there's a latch mechanism from a male and female perspective that engages this door. Most commonly in the traditional RV, there's some sort of mechanical apparatus, whether it's made out of plastic or metal, that is affixed to both sides of the door. The limitation with that is in case of rain, in case of high winds or anything else, if you forget that that is mechanically attached, it doesn't take a lot of power to shear those screws through the wall and ruin your coach. You create your own problems. So as all things, I described them earlier, there is some pros and cons to any direction you go in. What I love about its simplicity and having it such where if I grab this with any force, I'm not going to damage anything. The slight limitation you have is enough wind. If enough wind got behind this door, it will automatically close this and blow your door closed. That's a very small problem to have. I'd rather have that than the high likelihood of shearing a set of screws out of this. So that is our door hold, male and female position. They have some of their own ingenuity when it comes to their doorstep. I absolutely love this for the same reasons. In contrast, a lot of traditional doorsteps, they're adding unnecessary weight. On the cheaper stuff, it's made out of steel. The more expensive stuff, it's made out of aluminum. This entire coach, let me remind you, all aluminum, thus the price point, thus how lightweight it is. But on this is fabricated as their own components. As you see, part of the reason I love it the most is rather simplistic. It is a sleeve mechanism. I describe that because I think about the worst case scenario a lot. I've seen it sadly in the RV service world, lots of mistakes that owners have to learn the hard way, but I share that to say for every time someone has driven off and forgotten their steps. In this instance, it doesn't protrude out very much. So if you did forget it, I'm pretty confident that outside of maybe getting scuffed up, if it does bump into anything at all, it's just going to simply get bumped and find its way home. This coach is low enough to the ground, which will take me back to suspension, that you don't always need to utilize this, unless you're struggling to get that height. Some folk can easily get in there without the utilization of the steps. I only think about the suspension because this from the factory does allow for 2 inches of adjustment. It is something that you need to have done aftermarket. You can adjust these to give a little bit more ground clearance. Then of course that makes the necessity for the doorstep a little bit more important. When I'm talking about the door, traditional RV door, let me remind you of a couple of things. Some of the benefits to this, and I do have a sample which I'll share. This is a one-piece component. In a traditional RV world, you have an exterior skin, you have an interior framework for rigidity. That's either studs, whether aluminum or wood. You have your insulation, you have your interior decorative wall. This is a one-piece component. This same finish is on the interior and the exterior. It is an all aluminum. It is a honeycomb. The honeycomb provides its insulation and the integrity to the wall. It's 1 inch thick. This is a tremendous product. I only share that to say is this has the same integrity. On a traditional RV, everything that I can do to beat on the door or product of an RV, forgive me, I'll come back, has a little bit of variance when it comes to the door. We see in certain instances hail being a common one where the door will take hail damage but the body of a coach doesn't. In this, especially with all aluminum, it's a poor reference because this being a metal will probably expose some divots, but I just share that to say this door is made out of the same integrity of the body. In a lot of components or a lot of RVs, the storage doors and the RV door itself was bought off the shelf and it might vary in its quality and integrity. So this is built by the factory. They're adding an aftermarket door. They're adding an aftermarket window. The door grab is here. So when I discuss this door, I'm going to talk about some of its features. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the accessory and the keys. I'm going to turn for just a second. So I'll start with the door. The door operates very similar to what you might have experienced at home in regards to the traditional screen assembly. The screen goes up and down, allows some air to pass through here. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this lock mechanism. This is again just a grab handle for the door. The lock mechanism as currently displays as it's fresh out of the factory. It still has that code. Earlier I referenced, and I'm going to grab the keys. Earlier I referenced making sure that you indicate the code. So this code is the same that's displayed there on the number, but now it gives me a chance to talk about the utilization of these keys and why there's two key holes or key slots, and I'll explain as such. The top key is I'm going to describe as a bit more of a service key. The bottom key is the deadbolt. I'll do a quick demonstration because a deadbolt is more often locked from the interior, and you see this transition of a deadbolt protruding out. In transit, and this gets into the reason why there's a second key and the importance of something relative to safety. In transit, I'm typically going to teach or encourage you that you never use this deadbolt. I know it's a high unlikelihood, but you run a greater risk that in transit, if that deadbolt was crossed across that threshold and you hit the worst of a jarring pothole, you could exaggerate your problem with entering into the coach. So in transit, what we typically ask is that you only lock this top lock. Now when I lock this top lock, you're going to see nothing has happened here. All this is locking a mechanism, a cog of sorts that prevents this handle from being utilized. So now as I lock this door, you'll see it doesn't gain me entry. The importance of this has everything to do with the top of this lock. If you get it close up, it's got an engraved or an embossed M for master. What I don't have on me, and if you visit your local RV shop, you'll see that most employees have a green key. It is a master key, and what that allows me to do is most of the units on my inventory, I'm not going to lock the deadbolt because that forces me to have the factory key in hand. Those are safely secured. So I share this to say on a traditional RV lot, we're using the master key that allows us access only here. I share that because in transit, what I'm going to recommend you do is either, based on where your travel route is to leave it unlocked. Feel free. This is a secure enough fitting that this will not bump loose on its own. So either leave it unlocked or only lock this. But the risk you have there is that anybody in my industry could gain access to your coach if they come to find out that in a parked position, you've only utilized this one. So again, when you're parked or in storage mode, you use your deadbolt. In transit, only use this service mechanism. It should be open. So this is, again, as far as a manufacturer, called a Global Link Key. There is a company online that I would give you a guidance towards because we as a dealer use them as well. It's called RV Locks and More. RV Locks and More will carry 80 or 90% of your keys. They also cover other accessories. But again, when you purchase an RV, you should take a inventory of every key that you own and identify those numbers for later utilization. So moving on, we're just going to get inside of the coach. A couple of other things that I'll describe. Again, the grab handle, of course, that's important when you're going in and out of the coach for security. And then we have another security light or safety light, scare light, patio light. This is nothing more than a vent situation. Sometimes these are vents tied to plumbing. In this instance, your plumbing vent is on the roof. This is nothing more than an area where you have some electric components. So this is a vent that allows them to stay cool. We're going to move into the interior. We'll cover up the buttoning up of the awning and the utilization of this awning in a little bit. Hi there, folks. We're going to continue on. We're going to do our interior shots. When we talk about doing a lot of the tutorial on the Safari Condo product, I'm going to spend a majority of the time here because this is your control panel area. So it's centrally located so that you can access things as soon as you walk in or as you're utilizing the cabin. I'm going to spend most of the time on the two major components, which is my monitoring station here and then my Truma Combi. I described this earlier when we talk about our vent on this off-door side or door side, forgive me. So starting with this sea level, I can't help but start with, because if you find some of these other videos that are out there, they're showing some Safari condos with some older componentry. And so the evolution typically is rather minimal in this industry. They mostly evolve by bells and whistles and color decor changes. But this sea level is a tremendous panel. I'll explain. In a traditional RV, you have a holding tank, that the way you're monitoring these holding tanks is with some sort of apparatus that is going through the tank. And now traditionally what that is something that looks like a screw. Now if you can envision, when a screw goes through something, there's going to be some protrusion on the other side. So what happens is you have these screws that are going through this plastic tanks, and there's wire leads. They're typically in a diagonal formation, so that you can envision one is full, one is 3/4, one is 1/3 or 1/4, and one is empty. But what happens is when water solidifies, when it creates sediment, when you have other debris in there, when you think about the black tank, you can get false reading when you have an actual empty tank. So this sea level monitoring system also is a bit indicative in regards to the technology it uses. This is reading through the tank. There is no protrusions through the tank. So this is a far more accurate system with less opportunity for it to fail. We are still talking about an RV, and what that means is every time you go down the road, just the rough road can cause components to have some failures. But on that note, we're going to go through here. If you've ever camped before, the data that is accumulated on this panel is going to be identical. What we're mostly looking at, as I'll depress, is my battery tank monitor, my battery monitoring, my fresh water. We're going to move on to gray water, and then the black. We also have a switch here that illuminates when we engage our onboard pump. Onboard pump is solely for when I'm using my fresh water. So when we talk about this, when we look at this, a battery system, again, the monitoring of the battery doesn't involve any on this system. Battery monitoring is simply just wires connected to your battery, and on a 12-volt system, anything past 12.4 is a good, safe, healthy battery. When we look at fresh water, I have 46% of the water in here because I'm going to demonstrate when we look at our sink and our toilet how some of these functions operate. I need water to demonstrate those. So then on that note, gray water is the waste accumulated solely from your sink and your shower. The black water is solely from your toilet. Your pump, I'm going to illuminate to show you when it's engaged. I'm going to ask that you keep your pump off. In this particular coach, we're going to demonstrate a few of the reasons on how it's utilized and the importance of when it stays off when we get to talking about the sink. So I'm going to move on. When we look at some of these things, they're rather simplistic or easy to identify. We have 4 USB connections. These are not the only USB connections. You have at least 2 more in here in the rear of the coach. But in this one, I'm just going to quickly point out, I believe it's the center button. The center button, I'll close this for a minute. The center button, if you notice, it also is providing illumination, meaning this button is in control of the power that is allowed to charge your devices, but also providing you the illumination. So when this button is off, you're not getting any power connection. Something that is often overlooked in its description, it's basically something that is there, but is rendered useless. This is a device that is attached to your Truma. I believe this is referred to as a thermistor. And what that is this is that's paying attention to ambient temperatures. Historically, on a thermostat, you have some version of being aware of what the ambient temperature is that allows the device to activate on and off. And because I have the potential of having this in a very large coach with these type of monitoring sensors throughout the coach, this is right here, and this is what's going to tell this when to engage relative to heat. So I'm going to come back to say this was the light switch for the 2 USBs. These you'll see as we diminish the lights. These are going to be to your kitchen assembly. This one again is here. So moving on, I'll touch on this Truma in greater detail. I'm going to bypass this for just a second and talk about these 2 lower devices. When we look at individual lights, as you see me amend, one of the things that is really unique about this coach and has something that I've not seen in any other coach is a master power switch. This is a master light that as I shut this off, it allows the lights to render useless, of course, and now these are not functioning. Not until I engage this, it gives it a little blue illumination when it's disengaged. When it's engaged, that light is off, and now all of my light switches throughout the coach work. One of the things this does a great job is what looks like a volume button up and down is going to be a dimming capability. So in this particular coach, as you'll notice, I'm going to hold this down, and then all of the lights are going to begin to dim. It's kind of tough with the fact that we have some lighting going on for our video recording process, but this is a dimming functionality that is almost not seen in any other coach. I have seen in late some light switches that provide dimming. This is the whole coach. And so on that note, please just remind yourself that sometimes you'll find that light switches aren't operating, but it's mostly tied to the master power being off. So then on that note, the last thing I'm going to discuss here, I'm going to ask you to, if need be, we'll do a close-up, but paying attention to the decals provided from the factory. This is a traditional gang plate, as I believe they're called, in traditional electronic components or electric. It's no different than what you'd see in a traditional Home Depot or Lowe's or home supply store, in that most components in a traditional RV, they're not going to be at your RV hardware store. They're RV specific. This is something that you're going to find in any home. And what I want to draw attention to is the fact that you have a light switch here. And what I'm getting at is there's very few components in this coach that is going to be utilizing the shore power. I'll allude to it a little bit later, but I'm just going to take the time to tell you that when you're not connected to shore power, you don't have any 110 connection. So without the 110 connection, it's hard for me to elaborate here, but what I'm just going to quickly tell you is when you're using shore power, you only have a few items here. They're limited by the breakers. These breakers, which we'll go into detail, look exactly like you're used to at home. You need to divert power. So what that means is on one breaker, I do not have enough energy available that I could run the microwave and this plug at the same time. So these images are basically where I'm diverting the power to. As this is indicated on this side, I'm giving power to plug number 1 as indicated here. If I was plugged into shore power, I'm going to have a green illuminated light on my GFCI plug. So on that note, if I needed to use the microwave, again with the indication by this image here of microwave, I depress that switch, I'll lose power here, and then my microwave activates. If we were on shore power, you'd see the digital display of your microwave illuminate. You'll also hear it come to life with a registered beep. So this is nothing more than a diversion switch for power, only accessible when you're on your shore power. I'll quickly tell you, there's 2 other items. That is air conditioner, microwave, and then 110 plugs that you don't have access to on shore power. So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. This is a Truma Combi unit. The Truma Combi is the reference to combined in one device, so as opposed to having a separate heating furnace for the house of the heat or the house heat, then also a separate device for a water heater. This is combined into one unit. Really efficient. Almost silent in its operation, and probably one of the most efficient products on the market when it comes to a propane device. So now I'm going to go into some details in regards to how this works. Well, picking back up when it comes to the hot water heater, because I was just trying to demonstrate that if I don't make my choice, I want to walk you through what your actual choices are. We're going to start with Eco or economy, and this is probably the most traditional utilized form when you have some time about how long it needs to recuperate. And what I mean by that is typically these things are functioning at varying temps. And what I mean by that is when we get back out here, I'll demonstrate that Eco is going to be a desired hot water temperature of 104 degrees. The hot is going to be at 140. When we get to boost, it changes the behavior a little bit. It does take it to a higher setting of 144. Let me take the time to quickly share with you. This is less about punishment or torture because I think most people traditionally 104, 105, 110 is on the hotter side of what people's tolerances are for hot water. Please remind yourself, there you go, I had it not set, but please remind yourself that in all of these instances you do have the ability through the mixing valve of hot and cold water to dial it down to your appropriate setting. So I share that to talk about, again, 104 being economy, hot being 140, where most people don't need that temperature to heat. What happens is boost changes the behavior. Boost goes to a rate of 144, but it takes all of the energy because imagine you can run both your house heat in this instance as well as your hot water. But this one is placing all the emphasis on the hot water heater. So it's taking and putting into, dare I call it, sleep mode, your whole house heat, which right now we do not have any house heat on. I'll just explain. We're going into the wrong setting here. But when I put on heat at any temperature, so long as, because now you see icons that are functioning, boost is basically hijacking all of the energy demand. Boost is taking it such where all of the energy consumption is taking to the water to cook that water to 144 degrees. It's going to get that water to 144 degrees, and then it's going to give the ability to turn back on house heat. So for now, house heat is sort of secondary. So I'm going to come back to this and better explain hot or Eco because Eco by chance is the most common. So now as you'll see, I have Eco included. It is only active because right now it's actively heating that water. This will stop blinking when the water is at that set desired temperature. But again, the user interface tells me I have heat on. I have hot water cooking, so to speak. My fuel choice is on all propane, and then my fan speed is on that economy mode, meaning one fan blade engaged. I'm going to now take both of these to the off position and do some further teaching. So now again, when I take these off, you'll simply see that all icons go away and I have nothing happening above the line. This gives me a chance to teach about these others. This one, when it comes to my fuel choices, I just want to start by saying everything that we teach to a renter is basically leave it on gas. I can safely tell even owners of an RV that, again, this unit is so efficient that you might not find the need to do anything but gas. But because you own this device, and if you really get into the details, you'll start to find that you have a couple of other options. Mix 1, Mix 2, Electric 1, Electric 2. And what we're really discussing here, when you move away from gas, I'll start with the place that these being referenced as electric opportunities that are coming solely by the indicator of that lightning bolt are only going to exist when you're on shore power. We're not talking about 12 volt energy, because 12 volt energy won't heat up anything enough to become functional. So when we talk about these fuel choices, we're getting into shore power. So as a starting place, when we talk about electric 1 and we talk about electric 2, we're really talking about the heating elements. Inside this has an electric 1, an 850 watt element. On electric 2, it has a 1700 watt element. So what we're really doing when we talk about these Mix 1 and Mix 2, if I have my math correct, I believe at Mix 1, we're talking about an 80% gas mixture with, again, 20% electric falling onto the lower heating element. We have the same gas and electric mixture, it's just going to the higher heating element. I'm just going to take this time to remind you, this is a lot like your heat pump, meaning when you do have access to shore power, moving things over to all electric is a way of saving some energy, because gas in 5-gallon increments, or propane I should say, in 5-gallon increments with these 20-pound bottles is by far a pretty costly investment. If this was permanently parked and you had a 100-pound permanently mounted propane filling tank, it would be a lot less expensive per gallon. So on that note, we're just going to bring this back to all gas because that's the preferred method. Now I'm going to take the time to share with you that in the fan mode by itself, when I don't have any other heating elements, I do have the ability to turn this on to vent. And now in fan mode, I have 1 through 10. This is very similar to our ceiling roof vent. And as I referenced when I taught that, you can use both of these in conjunction. So when I'm boondocking or dry camping, I can move the air about the cabin to help cool this coach down. I'm going to bring this back to 0 and move on with the tutorial. So I have whole house heat being this thermostat in the RV. I have hot water, I have fuel choices, I have fan speed. Fan speed, again, I can use when I'm activating heat, or I can use by itself. The following one, similar to the roof vent, gets into some automation. The automation of this allows me to set a time so that, imagine it's earlier than you traditionally arise or wake, so that when you set this, this is going to warm the hot water and warm your cabin at a set time. So that is the automation function, and when you do so, as if we were to choose a time, and I press enter, let me try to do this. This is setting it. Oh, I see what was happening. After I set this, it asked me for an end time, and then it asked me what I'm doing. Am I turning on my house heat? Because I don't have to turn on house heat. What if I just want to put on water? In this instance, I'm going to leave this off and press enter. Now it moves on to water. So let's say I'm calling it echo. So now when I engage this, my gas is there, it's on, I'm going to move out the way, and now you'll see my timer blinking. So what that timer blinking is telling me my automatic setting is on, and the only thing that's going to engage is hot water on propane. Again, I can have activated both of these if I so chose. If my timer was blinking, that means, and both of these were selected, that means I've engaged both hot water and heat to engage. So for now, I'm going to turn this timer off. Let's get back to my timer now is off. This one is clock setting, allowing me to set the current time. And then the last one is just going to get into some settings that typically only owners are going to utilize. Offset is a version of calibration. I'll come back to that in a second to better explain. Temperature is, of course, choice of Fahrenheit versus Celsius. We'll leave it on Fahrenheit. Then we get into brightness. This is, again, the screen setting. And then we have 12 versus 24-hour for military language as far as your choice of language. Index is a complete, I take that back, Index is your current software version. So if ever you're needing tech support or there's a later version available and someone asks you what your version you're running, that tells you. Then lastly, I'm just going to get to your reset. Reset is a factory reset, and most times that doesn't really occur. So when we talk about offset, offset is just something, earlier I alluded to the fact that we have this thermistor, because the difference of ambient temperature around here compared to what the brain is seeing can vary. So let's say you find yourself, based on ambient temperatures of where you typically camp, there's a 5-degree variance from what you're trying to set and what is actually. So you can set that offset to be a couple of degrees different. And what that does is it gives you the ability to set this so that when I do 80 degrees, it's really going to get me to about 73 degrees. And this is, again, having the ability to adjust this. So on that note, like all things, I'll encourage you to spend a bit more time. I'm going to turn this back to 0, and we'll leave that be. And then again, this is the exit button, exit functionality. Right now I can safely leave this alone, and I'm confident that nothing is happening because I have no icons either steady or flashing above the line. Any further questions, please divert back to the owner's manual or online. Truma does a great job of teaching folks directly. I wanted to talk about the importance of the sink. Now, in a traditional RV, one of the things that most people have wrestled with, until you get into the terminology of a full-time coach or a much larger coach where you have an abundance of countertop space, most campers have already wrestled with and resigned to how little of countertop space you have to work with. So on that note, I'm going to come back to the commentary that most components, whether it's a microwave or a switch, you have these trim levels, and back to good, better, and best. And I share this all to say that in the component choices from a factory's perspective, this is, I dare say, outside of aesthetics, on the higher end. And what I mean by that is anytime you have an appliance that is recessed, the reference to being recessed is so that when I'm not utilizing it as a sink or a stove, I have the ability to use it as some version of countertop space. I slow down a little bit, or I put an asterisk there when I say some version of countertop space, is because these are glass. So I certainly don't want to use these as a cutting board. In our rental fleet, we do provide a cutting board, so be careful of that. I'm also going to be mindful of weight, temperatures, and such. So when I reference this as usable countertop space, I'm just going to urge you to use some caution and slow down a little bit. So when we talk about this first apparatus, or the sink, I only want to talk about a little bit of its functionality, and as I'll get into later detail in almost all things, there's some pros and cons. So aside from the fact that this is recessed, for it to be recessed, some of the functionality, as you see here, there's a swivel mechanism in regards to its faucet, as well as the mechanism that turns the sink on and off. And as a result, it adds a separate precautionary tail. If I didn't have this type of sink, and then we'll get into greater detail on the exterior of the coach where you do have an outdoor shower, I would be less inclined to talk about the disadvantages of leaving my onboard pump on. When I come back to this, because I referenced this earlier in my control panel, this is where I engage my onboard pump. I'm going to describe onboard pump as the reference of gaining water when I'm using solely my fresh water tank. My fresh water tank is as shown at 46%. That means I have about 13 gallons of water in here. I share that to say I do not use a pump when I'm on city water. If I was at 0 of fresh water, it means my fresh water tank is empty. But then I go and plug into a city supply, or just basically using the garden hose, then I never use the pump, because the pressurized source of that water is what would give me my water flow. Right now, as I've turned this on, you saw there was a little bit of water if the camera picked that up, and it comes out. Now I'm going to engage the pump, and one of the things that's very important to understand about the pump is it does have some audible nature. You're going to hear this on camera, but what you won't feel is its vibratory feeling. I use these sensories in regards to protecting myself in the coach, so when I engage this, what might be hard for the camera to pick up over the noise of this water flow has everything to do with this vibratory and audible effect that my pump is running. So on that note, I'm just going to teach a little bit further to say that because of the nature of this being swivel and how this operates, the reason that we would encourage you not to use the pump or leave the pump on in transit has everything to do with the worst case scenario with this spigot being turned up. It's still in an off position. But if we will listen closely, I have the ability to engage this simply by depressing this, and now water is flowing. So this is where the danger of leaving this pump on in transit having solely to do with this faucet valve. So on that note, in conjunction, in most coaches, you're going to have some sort of a stopper. So to help us alleviate problems and be an extra safety method, what we like to teach is making sure that this valve is placed upside down so that it doesn't have the ability to find its home and then through vibration of going down the road ever get seated. Because again, we don't want this water to come on. So on that note, simply making sure that my lever, when we do a close-up, I'll show you the hot and cold nature of it, but it's simply down into the lower position and turn this off, and now I can lower this. There's some importance to how much pressure is used here, because these hinges, they do have a fair amount of tension that helps, so I'm going to encourage you to nurse this down. They do have replacement rubber that comes from the factory in regards to if the rubber resting positions that help cushion its fall ever get lost or damaged, so you can replace those. But again, be mindful when you lower this down. Be careful about using this as a cutting board. Be careful about putting hot temperatures there. All right, folks, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about this bathroom. It's a little bit of confined space. This is a reality of most single axle coaches. The reference in the world of RVs, in case you never heard this before, is called a wet bath. Wet bath means my toilet, which is behind me now, and my shower assembly are all in the same. You're wondering where the shower is. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to decipher at first, but what I'm just going to describe here is my sink assembly, as you start to realize, becomes my shower assembly. So this ability of extracting out. Right now it's dripping a little bit because I don't have this engaged to where I still have some water dripping. But of course I would then use the same assembly. Right now we do have water flowing. So in that instance, when I want to convert this, I'm going to bring this back. I'm traditionally using this as a sink because I do my fair share of camping, folks. I'm going to describe it as such. I typically like to leave this valve open. I usually like to wash my hands in increments or short bursts of water. The reference in camping, I believe, is referred to as a Navy shower, trying to be as conservative as possible with how much water you use. So as opposed to having this off and leaving this on, this one, again, I find a little bit more of an inconvenience to utilize this because if my hands are dripping, I'm putting water externally on the sink area, very small space. So my preference, again, is to typically leave this one open, and then I'm just doing in short bursts, keeping my hands underneath the sink, and then hopefully draining. So now moving on from there, I'm going to just quickly re-engage this to demonstrate that that water is off, because when I want to use this as a shower, and I'm going to show you a little bit behind me, this floor and the floor bottom to this is very much a shower drain pan. It has the same angle as the bathroom facility, but it does have a drain. All the water is running behind me. So when I want to use this as a shower, what is a little bit tough to determine here is I have a track mechanism around this. I would simply, let me see if I can rather easily share this with you. I'm going to simply separate this shower curtain, and what I do is I bring this all the way around. There are Velcro fixtures that help me determine where this is. It keeps a good tight fit around the coach. As I move this all around, you'll start to see things when we get to it. I'd have to continue on a bit more, but when we get to this, there'll be a connection point that allows me right here to pull my shower faucet through here. And this is where, again, it would continue over. And this is where most times people are going to hook this up or hold this in their hand. When you let this fully extend, all the water would drain. And of course, you do have, just as in the compartments, this piece of flooring that allows you to remove that. But this is how I'm going to protect the walls of my RV and the interior of the bath. I'm going to turn around for just 1 second to demonstrate one other thing. In our cabinet here behind the bathroom, this is something that I've not seen a lot of people use, because in the closed position, I don't know that I'm too concerned with getting my toilet a little bit wet as I shower, but this is something that is a toilet cover that specifically protects your toilet for when there's water happening in this atmosphere. So now I'm going to put this back. I'm going to run this back through here. And then this one. The thing that I would talk about this in greater detail, I will explain as such every time I've camped using one of our Safari Alto products. You just really want to make sure that you do a fair amount of air drying You don't want to pack this up when there's a lot of moisture on here, because then of course you run the risk of having mildew develop. So of course, letting this dry into a fully completed dried piece of plastic, and then you simply just bring this back to the rear, and this is where it stays in transit. And now I'm going to get to discussing the toilet at greater length. I'm going to move this up out of our way so that I can demonstrate here. Now, one of the things that hopefully with some lighting, I'm now reaping the benefits. I don't know if you can pick up that mirror image, but the drain happens to be to the left portion of the toilet. The drain is no different. I'm going to bend down to demonstrate. The drain is no different than our sink assembly. It has this threaded valve as a stopper. Outside of cleaning maybe the floor of this coach, I don't understand why else I might want to utilize this, but what I know I don't want to happen is have water pool up unnecessarily. So again, we're going to give you the guidance to leave this upright in here. And now I'm going to talk about the toilet. The toilet, as far as operation, isn't much different than what we might experience at home. Let me rule out for you first that this is not a bidet, as they might call it, I think in France. This is more of an assistant to help clean the toilet. And I'll explain, because in all things there's some pros and cons, as I keep alluding to. This is a plastic toilet. Plastic toilet is solely there for how light weight nature it is. This is probably not more than just a few pounds. So when I talk about that being plastic, it takes a little bit more care and concern to clean, and it has a lot to do with the water and how it vents. So when I flush this toilet, this is a trigger flush toilet. Sometimes they're a foot pedal, but a trigger flush toilet, as you clearly see, water is coming out there. Now, since the water is only coming out from one area and not completely throughout the toilet, this is where the benefit of having this as a helpful cleaning agent. Toilet paper might be the most common offender in that if toilet paper doesn't find its way down. As you're engaging this, because this is the only time this is pressurized, again, I'll demonstrate, there's no water happening here, but when I'm engaging the toilet, now this wand is pressurized, and this is something that will help you clean, maybe help the toilet paper find its way out. And so this is the utilization of this, and so that is the reason that these exist, and they are very helpful. Other than that, simple toilet mechanism, no different. This is about the only maintenance item over the course of the lifetime you might find yourself replacing this valve. I'll explain a little bit in greater detail. This valve is tied to the pressure of the water. So again, that does have the potential of failing. I'm going to walk you through the one or two other details about the functionality of this coach. If you'll notice, there's some water that's developing in the bowl. That's very purposeful. And what I mean by that is after I flush, after I release this valve, the water continues to flow for just a little while. And what that water is doing is creating effect, it's twofold really. In traditional plumbing where you have J-traps, that water that accumulates is there designed to help prevent odors and also bugs from coming up. So this one is functioning as some version of odor preventative from the below, but also helping to make sure things go down. So to help this, and anything that finds its way into the toilet next, having that little bit of water is going to serve as some version of a lubricant to ensure things go down. I'll talk about in a little bit greater detail, though, what I describe when we get to the outside as a healthy black tank. Healthy black tank, again, is just having the right amount or an abundance of liquids for any solids that get in there. I'm going to explain it in such a way that whenever I've camped, if I have by chance an extra glass of beer or something, a cup of coffee, I'm going to avoid my gray tank. I don't want to put these additional liquids into my gray tank because they don't serve as any benefit. So if I have a beer that needs to be disposed or a cup of coffee that has gone cold, I'm going to pour it into my black tank. I'm going to use my toilet because, again, this helps when I go to drain because more liquids is better. So that is what I describe as a healthy black tank. The cleaning agents that come from the factory, and you can use any version you want. This one goes into a little bit better capabilities when we think about digesting, and digesting is helping to break down solids. Solids are your toilet paper, solids are waste and other things. So I just share that to say these additives are typically added when the black tank is at an empty position. So in this instance, this coach has never been used. We would want to encourage a chemical agent, whether it's this or some of the pods. I refer to Tide pods, but they make these agents that are encased in plastic, and you drop them down. They're happening in advance of any waste, because in advance of any waste, now everything that falls in there, this starts to help break down its solids, and again, it prevents any odor from arising. You want to do this, again, in advance, because an empty tank, once it's being utilized, will give off more negative odors, or foul odors, I should say, than a full tank. So you don't add this after it's been, after you filled the tank. Continuing on with the rear portion of the cabin, I'm going to continue on with some of the upper section, as I described earlier, some of the cabinet pulls, right? These are friction hinges. I only want to talk about for two things because often they're overlooked. Again, just the attention to detail that Safari Condo has. We still have the marking indicators as far as what the capacity is. But back here, we do have one additional 12-volt cigarette lighter style. So you have a cigarette style plug for 12-volt. On the interior of this cabinet or upper cabinet, I have a 110 plug. I'll remind you, 110 plugs are only accessible when you have shore power connection. So I'm going to close these. I'm going to move on. I'm going to quickly point to and discuss that you have these map lights. One of the great things about these map lights, again, I have an on-off position. I can touch them. But then I also have a USB. So earlier when I talked about the 4 USBs up front, I have 2 additional, one on each map light. I'll put this back, turning it back on for any special lighting. And then I'm going to talk about some of the cushions in the assembly. I'll spend a little bit more time on the rear window. This rear window and the front window are the only ones that differ a little bit by their construction and their utilization. Otherwise, I'll spend some more detail on that. But talking about the bed and the cushion position, I'm going to sit down for a little bit. When you look at this, these are often referred to as a bit of a twin bed because without these backrests completing this span to create that king position, I described it as 80 by 80, maybe it's 80 by 81. I do have something that resembles 2 twin beds, so often these can be used independent, leaving this space open. So on that note, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things before I make this into a completed bed. I just want to highlight the fact that you have storage really tucked away everywhere. You'll hear that Velcro giving because on the back side of all of their cushions, they have some Velcro here. But I have another storage compartment. Well, it's tremendously deep. It gives you a lot of storage for blankets and such. But when I put this back, I'm going to show in some detail a little bit later when we get below here because my Truma Combi is down here and some of the heating vents. I have vents on all lower portions. I'll share it. But at this point, I'm also going to turn around and I'm just going to share with you, as I alluded to earlier, that these things lift up like the hood of a car. You'll notice that they have this assembly that allows me to gain access. I described earlier that I have shelves or cabinetry fronts that move to gain access to, but most times you're going to want to use this to gain access from the interior. I'll close this down. And so now what I'm going to share with you when I look at this as a bed system, and then I'll talk about one of the things that comes with the coach, is how this differs from the front. The front, and in most RVs, you're going to have the ability to take the bench and that bench, or your booth I should say, and convert the dining table, and the table is typically lowered, and the table then rests on a ledge, or a carpenter might refer to this as a cleat, and that's what completes that span and creates that covered void, and then you're typically using the backrest cushions to make it into a bed. In this instance, they're a little bit different, and I'll only describe that to tell you that this soft cushion does have a hard back, as you can hear it. So this one is pretty easy in the sense that you're doing nothing more than pushing this in here, and then it rests, and that's what completes the span. And obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory that if I were to do that with the other one, it's going to force me a little bit closer into the front of the cabin, but that's what completes a span. I just want to share one thing. I think this is referred to as some sort of ballast or something like that, but this foam device does come from the factory. A lot of people toss these to the side. We find that they're not utilized all the time, and what this is solely for ergonomics. I'll take this back out to demonstrate, because if I was using this as some sort of bench seating, I might not have the greatest comfort if I just rest up against the wall or lack of. So when I take these cushions and I place this here, it keeps me safely off of the window. And then when I take this as a backrest, it has all the ergonomics to give me a much better seating arrangement and allow myself for some more socialization when we're just sitting back here drinking coffee or something. But there's a whole lot of folks that typically never take this out of a bed mechanism, and they just leave this in a bed position, and everything forward is going to be more the living area. I'm going to go into the window. The windows, tremendous window. These are European style windows. I can safely beat on them a little bit. It is a plastic window, so there's no glass in there. And one of the things that very much differs in a traditional RV window is the fact that this is also dual pane. Now, in certain RVs, especially when you get to full-time and on a more traditional RV where there's glass, there is no such thing as a dual pane window that has any of the gases that are in them on a traditional residential home, because going down the road, eventually a leak will occur and that gas will dissipate. So the benefit of having a dual pane window is that just that extra curtain of air. So that little area that the air can accumulate in there still serves as some sort of thermal barrier, and it really does perform very well. Again, avoiding any rock chips that could cause a fracture, as this very much happens. We have landscapers that in weed whacking have tossed up a rock and broken a window. So this window, I absolutely love how lightweight it is, how functional it is, and when they're all over the coach like this, you have tremendous views. So I'm going to get into this window. I'll walk you through the differences on how the front and the window differ, front and back window differ from the rest, but I'll start with the functionality of it. I'll start with, because it's closed, the day screen, or what might be viewed as a bug screen, because this is translucent, of course, and is designed to keep bugs out. One of the beautiful things about this system is that you can, when they're left together in conjunction, use them in one entire piece. So now I have my night screen or my privacy screen. Of course, as you already observed, I can change them in any position. I will encourage you to be a little bit careful, because this particular plastic clip is a bit fragile. If you're too rough with it, it'll also separate, and then it doesn't allow you to latch them together. So just be mindful there when you're separating. So again, this function and the rest of the windows, it's almost all identical. The only thing different that the back window does, as it's identified here, is also an exit window, is sometimes, in this particular unit, doesn't have it, so forgive me, we're going to look to edit that. There's a safety mechanism that sometimes occurs, and what that does is provide a bit of a beeping. And so in case your unit, and maybe this is an older version, it looked like an alarm sensor with a trigger point, and what that does is as a reminder to help you avoid departing with the window open. So on that note, I'm just going to quickly get into one of the main benefits about this window. The window has two pistons here that have a thumb thread that allows me to tighten the tension, and this allows me to leave that window in any fixed position, in any degree of angle. But the real benefit to this is everything tied towards these locking mechanisms. So now when I take the tension off of this and I allow it to close, what we'll show you in close-up is the locking mechanisms. When we talk about that, we mostly are interested in our transportation, or a fully locked window for having an airtight and watertight seal. And that means I'm bringing these levers fully forward of this connection point. Whereas, if I ever wanted to, and is highly recommended, especially in cold weather camping where you need to vent this coach to avoid setting off that carbon monoxide sensor, or for any other reason venting, I simply unlock this window, and when I place this locking lever in the center position, it does a phenomenal job of allowing me to have a reasonably secured window, because it doesn't allow anybody to simply just pull and open it up. But then I'm able to stick my hands out there, because now I have the ability to let air vent to and from. The main area of precaution, I would say, in the front window, you're going to cause yourself a tremendous headache if you drove down the road in that middle position. In the front window, that reference to the sensor very much exists there, because that amount of wind that would creep underneath there will cause that window to rip off. In the rear window, or on the side windows, the disadvantage of driving down the road with these in a vent position is it's going to create a vacuum. So if you happen to drive off and leaving this in this position, you're just going to suck in all the road dirt that is capable, because we've seen it happen. So you really just want to work off of some version of a checklist for when you're out there camping that gives you these polite reminders on what to button up, what to close, and how to operate the coach in transit. We're going to talk more about that front window in greater detail. I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to talk about a couple of other items just at the rear of the coach here. I've got nothing else to discuss in these cabinets, because there is nothing else happening here. I don't have any additional cabinetry or plugs. So the only thing I want to talk about is I've got two features back here that are currently outside of the viewpoint. I have a wardrobe here. The wardrobe has a 25-pound capacity on that hanging rod. You don't have to use it as a hanger space. You can use it as traditional storage. And then we're going to get into the thermostat. If we press a button, we're going to engage this just to bring in some life to the panel. And typically, again, you're going to see, as I referenced, the first setting, you're going to find that you have a fan functionality. Most commonly, again, we're using this solely for air conditioner and heat, so I'm going to move on. The second depression gives me my snowflake, indicating cool or air conditioner. very much like what we might have at home. We're indicating we were at 55 being the lowest. The only reason we're not seeing any activity is because, again, we're not attached to shore power. Shore power is what's required for the air conditioner function. This device is a 12-volt device, so of course we have power to it right now. Air conditioner is requiring 110. So past here, I'm going to move on to the next setting is typically furnace. Furnace, I alluded to the fact that we do not have a gas furnace attached, so this is null and void. Moving lastly to our heat pump. Heat pump, did I go past it? I did, I apologize. So furnace to heat pump. Heat pump is the reference to I have the ability to create heat out of the air conditioner unit. It again only works to 42 degrees, and now this is where I would dial this up and down. And as in contrast to the Truma unit, this one does have, as I remove this, I can show you, some technology built into there where this is actually paying attention to ambient temperature. So this device as a whole is capable of reading externally what's happening, so that if we had it back to, let's let it reset, if we had it back to that temperature setting or heat, then it's going to know when to kick on and when to kick off. So moving on, we're going to talk about a couple of other items just before we change camera views. And in this vantage point, we've got two things at play here. I'll go into greater detail because when I start first with my smoke alarm, it's really tied to a complete system. The smoke alarm is very much tied and works in conjunction with my fire extinguisher, which is at the front entry door, and then my carbon monoxide, propane, and carbon dioxide sensor, which is behind us. So we'll talk about that in greater detail. While we're here, I'm just going to quickly say everything about the correct utilization of this. If you're familiar with home maintenance, is going to be the same. We encourage you to check the batteries once a year. There is a test button on here. It operates the same. This is battery operated. There is no 110 backup power. The other piece of this is there's a bit of a lifespan to them. So on, I believe the number to be somewhere at 5, possibly 10 years for both this and the carbon monoxide. We encourage you to replace these devices. Again, this is something that you can pick up at your average Home Depot supply. Moving on, I'm going to talk about your max air vent. This is a phenomenal device, but it is something that certain RV folks have been used to from other RVs because it's a bit of a well-known brand. My awareness towards Max Air as a brand started with having them become a cover, a traditional cover. These vents, they're 14 by 14. It's the same square opening that an air conditioner would fit in. These vents more traditionally, and the less expensive version, even Alto offers, is a more manual type vent. I share that to say the vent cover, which is just this plastic exposed lid, is rather susceptible to hail and other external factors. So Max Air, when it was first introduced to me, was an external aftermarket accessory that you can provide and add some coverage. The main benefit was, aside from how sturdy it was something that allowed you to leave your roof vent open and not have to concern yourself with rain. Because of the direction of the shroud, it prevented rain from directly coming in. Now they moved into the functionality of where they're building a device in its entirety. This is a 12-speed fan. It's also a reversible fan, so it allows you to extract hot air out or sometimes bring cold air in. And then also, again, it has some other functionality and technology. But when I talk about a fan, the shroud with that positioning that doesn't allow rainwater in is built into this. So whether this is open and functioning or closed, you don't have to worry about rain unless you're in really torrential rain coming in from a sideways direction. Rain isn't going to come through here. I'm going to show you a little bit about the mechanics of this. I'm going to reach for the remote in just a second, but please know that this mostly operates the same whether I'm using it mechanically or I'm using the remote. The remote adds some additional technology pieces to it when it comes to its automation. So as a starting place, if I wanted to open this up, I simply turn this on. It's going to open this vent. Again, I can do this manually, and then it's turning this vent on. I've got an open and close here that gives me the ability to adjust, and then I also have the ability to, again, amend my speeds. The speeds are all about a little bit of how much air movement you have, but also about how loud this is functioning. Hopefully you hear just how quiet this is. This is probably a $500 piece of equipment, and it's tremendous. The main reason that a lot of people love this as I reach for the remote is mounted on the wall, is it does have some capacity towards, just like your Truma, has some capacity towards automation. And when I describe automation, my best scenario that I might envision this is utilized at has everything to do with when to automate this. So over here, there's a reference that says currently it's set to 78 degrees. What I mean by that, imagine potentially leaving a pet inside your camper, and as it gets to a certain point, as it starts to warm up, this automatically begins to vent. These things are tremendous because if you put a thermostat in here, you realize just how effective these are. It does work in conjunction with a 12-volt fan behind you, and so we can describe that. But in most boondocking type atmospheres, I reference boondocking as an off-grid camping scenario or something else where you're not plugged into a traditional shore power, having the ability to move air about the cabin, or having more than one ability to move air about the cabin, is tremendous. So you think about opening this up, using some screened windows and venting this, it keeps you really cool in the warm weather months. I'm going to put this back. We're going to talk a little bit about the fridge. Before I do so, I just want to really point out, in every Safari Condo product, and it might be hard to tell from this vantage point, we'll give a still shot here, there's a little bit of a data tag similar to the ones on the exterior. This one performs a little bit better for you, and it's pretty important because the majority of your appliances, there's a provided summary sheet including the model number and a little bit more data. So out in the field, in case you have issues, so I think in terms of, again, the Truma, often people are struggling through it, but this lists both your hot water, your Truma, your refrigerator, a couple of other items here. There's also your total weights, your VIN number, the date of manufacturer. And so this is a really good piece of information. I'm surprised more companies don't do this. It's typically only observed in the higher end motorized. I'll just point out that there's a couple of other items. I won't go into great detail. There's a fair amount of pieces of fabric that have some privacy attachments to it. These are going to be for varying places. All of the porthole windows on the door, on our roof vent, these are basically blackout or privacy pieces of fabric. These little doohickeys, I'll leave one out here because we're going to explain in greater detail when we make this into a bed where those are utilized. And then I'll just quickly share with you, this will cover at the connection point because this is the brake control that is provided from the factory. And then I'll just ask you to realize that this is a bag that is accumulated. There is an owner's manual. I don't put a lot of emphasis into these owner's manual because typically they're generic. We do the YouTube video. For Safari Condo, this YouTube video would suffice, and this would go into greater detail. But a lot of people are let down in the traditional owner's manual when they realize it's not specific to their coach as far as placement of devices. But everything else that I allude to when I talk about that the RV is, as I might call, a sum of components, almost all of these devices that they bought externally, any literature that came with the device are going to be in here. So this is something that I would encourage you to take a fair amount of time to better understand these components. We've gone into detail. There's also a few other extras in here. There's always some goodies. They do extra keys. They do provide a keychain for you. They do provide some of the pieces of equipment that are going to be required. When I talked about your battery box, there's a drill bit assembly that's required for that security. Almost everything is in here. So I'll ask you to get familiar with these. These are VIN number specific. So again, everything that went into this coach is gone into this device. Please get familiar with this as well as your owner's manual. In talking about the refrigerator, this refrigerator is a rather unique refrigerator. Starting with, in traditional terms, your refrigerators historically have always been two sources of energy. That is propane, and then that is shore power when you're plugged in. Most often, and I'll only touch on this in rather limited detail because of all the variation you can get in your particular refrigerator. Most often when you look at a propane and a shore power or 110 refrigerator, there's going to be some functionality where you can choose the energy source. I'll explain in a minute why this one is different, but what I'm getting at is you're either picking and choosing an automated setting or you're forcing one of the options. The automated setting in almost all instances is always looking for shore power. Shore power is your least expensive source of energy. This is a unique refrigerator for a couple of different reasons, because this is a really unique refrigerator. It's brand new, but it's unique in the sense that it's far less common to see in a refrigerator that operates on 3 energy sources. So this one has the ability to run on propane, run on shore power, or run on 12 volt. So on that note, this is where you really want to get familiar with the sequence. I'm not sure if this allows you to drive the sequence, meaning when propane isn't found, where does it naturally divert to? In a traditional refrigerator, when shore power isn't found, it diverts to propane. So on that note, one of the things that's super unique about this, aside from aesthetics, is this has the ability to open in either direction. A lot of folks, if you're that far into your own refrigerator at home, you can adjust some of the mechanical hardware on left or right that allows it to open in either position. In this one, it's nothing more than grabbing it from either side, and you can do the same in the refrigerator. So this opens the refrigerator in this direction, this opens the refrigerator in this direction. It doesn't require any maintenance or any hardware adjustments, so that makes this refrigerator really spectacular. Picking up from the front of the coach, from this vantage point, we're going to cover a couple of items having to do with the table that we're utilizing and how this converts into a bed. But also I want to talk about this window. This window by far is one of the most important things to really express some precautions on. As I alluded to, most of these windows are all going to function the same, but because this is on the front and going down the road, this is where it really does have some sensitive pieces about it, thus what this tool is for. I'm going to start with the interior. Earlier I described that you have your shade systems, or two-part component, which again I'll refer to this as day shade or your bug screen, and you also have your privacy. I'm going to start by just making out one, hopefully it's an obvious point. Due to the curvature of this, the best guidance that I can give you to help this, last a good, healthy lifespan, and across all these windows, I'm going to tell you that in transit, you really should not keep this upright. Number one, if you have a tall enough vehicle, you're going to get to take complete advantage of seeing right through this coach. When we move these around our yard, we have a big work truck. And so with a larger pickup truck as opposed to a smaller passenger vehicle, you take full advantage of seeing through this coach, and it's really helpful because when you get to see people's headlights through the window, it's really something that reaps some advantage. But as a result, I really want to focus on what might be hard to tell here. In a retracted state, you can see some variance here to these, and all it is that there is a piece of a dowel, and that dowel, as is there, is solely there to help keep it in its shape or rigid. So if you imagine in this type of shape, the fear is that you have a little bit of gravity working against it and creates this belly of sorts. So again, I'm very much going to ask you for the health and lifespan of this. I normally keep my hand here. I'm doing some version of helping it find its form, sort of like an accordion shape. And so on that note, again, my best guidance is to keep these retracted in transit. But also, because these work on a tension system, when they're expanded, that is where I'm wearing out their tension system. So I want to keep these up and down in transit. There's something else about the importance of this. Sadly, we observed this happen on one of our rental fleets. Someone had the bright idea to leave a candle burning here, and enough heat came up, burned a nice hole in this, so please be mindful of that. So now on that note, we're going to get into this window and how this window varies and what's important to take notice to. I don't know if the camera is going to be able to display this here, and with the magic of some Hollywood editing, I already opened up that side because it's a bit out of my reach. And with the bike rack in front, I am going to have some limitations. So I don't have the ability to fully expand, but you see we have an open window. I'm going to reference this. So as a starting place, how these windows are similar is that I have all the same locking mechanisms that allow me to pull it all the way closed, which is a watertight, airtight seal. I very much can't encourage you enough to make sure that you have this fully retracted in transit. But ultimately, what happens here is we have these pistons, and earlier I described these as thumb screws to help keep tension. This thumb screw, as per the factory, is only capable of withstanding the weight of this window when it is fully open. They don't want this window being held open with these tension rods in a partial fashion. So without that bike rack being removed, I can't demonstrate this window fully open. So I only want to share that to talk about this device. Now this device, in my opinion, runs a little bit of risk, but this is what they're providing so that you could use it in a partial manner. And what I mean by that is in my rental fleet, we never send a client out with this device, because I'm going to explain that if I were to use this, what I'm forced to do is there is a metal plate here. That metal plate is what this locking lever is going to attach to, and this is designed to, again, secure it when you're in transit. That metal plate is going to be where one side of this tension rod, this is no different than what you've ever utilized at home to hang some sort of curtains, but on that note, I'm supposed to use it here on this side, and then this is where the dangerous part comes in, because what you can't see, or what might be tough to see visually, is there's a bit of a perforation. On no other window on this unit do you see what looks like carbon fiber. For anybody familiar with carbon fiber, it usually has a very similar looking imprint to it, but this, and it's only perforated around the edge, and as best I can describe this area I treat as fragile as if it was glass. This is a very sensitive area. So I share that to say the mistake that someone could make is if they're not putting it on this lip or recess right here, if they happen to place this down in this perforated area, with this being so fragile, you run the risk of cracking this. So this is where on my rental fleet we completely remove this, so a customer doesn't have the choice of using this. And on that note, you're only wanting to use these pistons in a fully extended manner. Otherwise, please be mindful. Just to let you know, this is stored in the lower compartment, and when I make this into a bed, I'll show you where I find this. So for now, I'm just going to simply close this up. And I'm now just going to take a moment to refresh your memory or explain the importance of having this in a full enclosure. And I described in the rear windows, I have two side windows, I have a bathroom window, I have a rear window. If I by chance left this in the middle position, which doesn't exist here, this lower plate only allows for one completed exposure. When I want to vent this window, I can take advantage of the two side ones for that middle crevice, and that's a vented window. But what happens is, and sadly, again, we've seen it all in our rental fleet, we had a client that forgot to button this up accordingly. He had it vented for the night before camping, and that little bit of wiggle room, as I would describe it, or crevice that was created by this not being fully brought back to the body of this coach allowed for enough air to get underneath that window, and the window peeled back and it broke the window. Now, luckily for us as a dealership, I happened to have a spare lying around. That spare had been cracked elsewhere but still created this covered span because these folks drove in from a neighboring state with a completely open vessel. Now I'm going to share with you some of the negatives of this industry with supply chain being disrupted during COVID. This window is near a 6-month wait list for when you need to have one replaced. So you can imagine you really want to be careful with it. I think the replacement cost of this window is in the neighborhood of $500 or $600. Shipping from Canada is about $500 or $600. So you're getting into a $1,000 problem that could all be easily avoided. Fully understanding the sensitivity around the perimeter of the window. It's identified by that checkerboard pattern or that mesh pattern, and that's a sensitive part that I want you to be careful of. So again, I'm going to hold on to this. I'll tell you where it's stored. I'm going to move into the table. So as I described earlier, this is a couples coach. A couples coach means it's mostly built for two to enjoy, one or two to enjoy. The reference there is I do have the ability to turn this into a sleep space, but it infringes on the privacy of folks. Thus, we have these privacy curtains that goes across. So in this table, I'm going to explain, and it's twofold because this table not only drops down into a bed, but also has the ability, as we discussed on the exterior, to use as the table externally. So on that note, the track mechanism that's mounted to the front is identical to the front there, but I've got to start with by repositioning myself here. Just if you'll notice, there is a lower leg. This leg is what's keeping this upright in an upright position. I'm going to grab this mechanism, and I'm going to do a little bit of assisting here. I'm working blindly. Let me find my lever. And so on that note, once this lever falls up and in a retracted space, there's nothing keeping it on here other than a little bit of gravity, because this wall mechanism, it operates a bit more like a C-clamp. So I'm going to try to lift this and see if I can do it myself, which I can. And now I'm going to take a minute just to lift this to demonstrate that this is one piece. It's retracted there. But what I'm targeting is this lip, this cleated area. So when I'm trying to make this into a bed, I'm going to stay here for a minute just to give you the gist, and then I'm going to have to reposition myself. But in a bed formation, this drops down, this rests on the bed, and then I'm simply repositioning my two backrests. My two backrests, and this is a bit awkward, but unlike the rear, the two backrests, on this one there is no hard backing. This is soft on both sides, and with both of those in place, it creates a completed span. I'm now going to move out the way and show you this visually. I'm going to share with you, again, the reference to completing this span by using the backrests. And it gives me an opportunity, after I move that over there, it gives me an opportunity to demonstrate. Earlier, when I took from this cabinet above the refrigerator, you see these cushions. These cushions, when you're using this as a bed, and look at how large this is, when you're using this as a bed, these cushions are designed to go in this rear corner. That rear corner is a very purposeful opening because if you remember, I have my basement air conditioner, as I describe it, below this seat. So for air conditioner to find its way to the cabin, it's got to exhaust itself there. Normally I wouldn't want to obstruct that when I'm using in a sleep position, just in case somebody's cell phone or pillows are going to fall. There's another one in there, and that completes this to a flat surface. So now I'm going to remove this table just so I can further teach about some of the items that are in their front section. All right, folks, moving on, a little bit more movie making magic. I now have the table removed. I want to first start by sharing with you another storage compartment. Just like in the rear of the bed, you'll hear this Velcro free itself up. So this is a storage compartment. Again, it gives you access to some of the componentry needed, but this is nothing more than a shelf. I'll come back to this. But again, with the pillow in place, you see that my frame rail for the table is gone. Something else which I didn't display, I'll just touch on here. These little belt straps, these are designed to affix to the table to help keep it in place. So these two latch onto the table when it's present. But now it gives me a chance to talk about a few of the other items here. I'm going to work in reverse because I'll spend the most time probably on that device when it comes to the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and propane sensor. So the things that are pretty easy for me to cover up is a 12-volt outlet. So again, we're currently operating on 12-volt only. So when you have one of these, private inverter, any other accessory, you can always gain access to it. If you recall, we had one other outlet, actually two. One is on the external, but on the interior, there's outlet number 1 that had the toggle switch that gives power to either that or the microwave, and then outlet number 2. We can follow up by, I'm going to move on to quickly discuss what's happening in this area, which is our fuse box. So again, to build on this, outlet number 2 would be clearly marked in our fuse box. We'll get a close-up and show you what is identified, because on the left-hand side, if you're familiar with what might be in your garage or a pantry area, most residential homes and apartments have a fuse box that looks like this, because these are the breakers. These are only the items that are going to function and have concern with this side of the fuse box when you're on shore power. Everything else that is operating on 12-volt power, which is your lithium batteries and your solar, is going to be functioning here. So you have all of these individual fuses, and then you have the itemized item on what they're attached to. What isn't shown here is going to be typically taped on the inside, and I noticed it in our bag from the factory, is they're always going to provide a couple of extra fuses. Very good camping advice to have extra fuses. Before I button this up, I just want to talk about the sensitivity of this. As far as a device, and one other nerdy fact, in the world of RVing, there's something called a converter. A converter is something that might give you problems or fail 5 or 10 years down the road. Typically, that's about the lifespan. But the converter is attached to the rear of this as your fuse box. The converter is what's going to provide you 12-volt power to the items that are requiring 12-volt to function when you're plugged into shore power. So a converter is converting your 110 into 12-volt. Again, that is only functioning when you're plugged in. The thing of importance that I just want to talk about is a bit of the sensitivity of these. I've seen these things fail, whereas the little bit of tabs or ears that are on the top and bottom of this, because when I put this in, I'm sliding it in, and I'll find the crevice there left and right, and then I just want you to be careful pressing on that, because if those tabs break, you're going to find yourself just putting a piece of scotch tape on there to keep that door closed, because there's no way is it worth replacing that whole device for a door that doesn't close. So on that note, you have your shore power, which is your breakers, everything that requires 110 on the left side of that fuse box. On the right hand side is all of the 12 volts. We're going to move on, and I'm going to spend a little bit of greater detail, so I'm going to get a little bit closer to this. But before I do, I just want to remind you, your safety features inside this coach, they're in conjunction with 3 other items. I'm going to point, but we'll just provide some close-ups. So as a starting place, I'm going to remind you that in most RVs, and this one happens to be to my left down by the door, we have a fire extinguisher. Fire extinguishers, just like all safety devices, they have typically a date stamp that tells you the health and safety of that and how often you need to check it. So I share that to say, again, remind you, we talked about the smoke alarm. It's above the camera here because smoke rises. When we talk about this device here having to do with carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and propane, these are all gases that by weight or gravity, they're heavier than air. So they're going to drop down, and they're going to be in this area accumulating. Now, I want to be very careful here because this is designed to be, as all three of those devices we just mentioned, a life-saving device. And I need to express a lot of caution here because I don't want to find myself on the wrong side of the law giving misinformation. So as all things, I'm going to ask you to continue to educate yourself, read the literature, better understand the componentry. So as a baseline, the thing that I'm most compelled to tell you about this is we get a lot of false alarms from this device. Sadly, my observation is 70–80% of the times this thing goes off, it's a false alarm. I'm going to exhibit by pressing the button, no different than a smoke alarm. I have a sensor. I just want you to understand what this sounds like. So on that note, you see it turn from green to red. The red tells me I have a problem, as if this was a real life alarm. That was just a reset function. But that noise can be very troubling for some, because when you read the literature, that noise tells you that you have a problem, and in an effort to save your life, you're supposed to exit the camper. So this is where I'm very cautious when I talk about all of the reasons this thing can go off. The best way I can describe this to you is that this is like a nose. This is the vent here that is always smelling, and the things that can set this off is any number of things: dust, dander, dirt, cologne, baby powder, smelly shoes, a dog that likes to scratch in this area. It doesn't take much to set this off. So I share that to say, first, be mindful of any activity in this area when you're dusting, when you're brooming, and so forth. But then also in conjunction with, if the alarm goes off, you have to think about, am I cooking? Do I have gas on? Is there other things on? And I share that all because the majority of the times that this goes off happens to be in the middle of the night. And when I discuss that, it comes back to the importance of when I talk about these windows and how great they are with being able to vent them. And what I mean by that is, in cold weather camping, it seems to be a bit of an oxymoron or disadvantageous to open the windows when you're trying to warm the cabin with your propane heater or your heat pump. But especially when you're using your propane heater and you're combusting an energy source that gives off some gases, this is where you want to make sure you vent your coach. The most common vent is going to be the ceiling, but otherwise any one of these vents that open up, because it is rather terrifying to be in the middle of the night and have this device go off, because you're going to be faced with the issue, what do I do? So being aware of this device, understanding how it's utilized. This too, again, I'll remind you, has a lifespan on it. Whether it's 5 or 10 years, I'll ask you to read the literature. But that's about the only maintenance. There's nothing else to it. Now, a bit of precaution, which when we talked about the battery disconnect related to lithium batteries, most campers, they might be aware, even on a traditional battery, of a battery disconnect. And all of this is to keep your batteries in a storage, when in storage, in a state so that when you come back to the camper, your battery is still capable of being used. I talk about this as some version of its own watch battery. And what I mean by that is, if ever you utilize a battery disconnect, this device will start screaming at you the same way it did in that alert, because it's basically saying, I'm starving for power and I can no longer save your life. So it's got this on-board, as I might call it, watch battery to give you this alerting system telling you I'm running out of juice. So again, please just be mindful, read the literature on this, and be very cautious. The thing that I failed to mention, and what seems to happen and what is most relevant about night sleeping, is when I talk about this, and I described it as a carbon monoxide, propane, and carbon dioxide. If I have this right, carbon dioxide is what we expel when we sleep. And again, when you do not vent this coach, just one person, because it's happened to me by myself, breathing can put enough carbon dioxide in this cabin to set this off. So you really just want to be careful. Vent the coach, folks. It's by far the safest method. So now on that note, I'm going to, lastly, while I'm still here, let me reposition myself. So on that note, I only want to talk about, if you recall, I referenced your basement air conditioner. I'm going to demonstrate one more time that from this seated position, these do have the ability to gain access from below. What this one doesn't have, and probably rightfully so, here you get a chance to see the vent that I was just covering up. What this doesn't have is the ability, like the others do, to keep this upright. But I only want to show you and remind you that this is your air conditioner. So if you think in terms of an air conditioner at home, there's always some filters. Even in traditional roof vents in an RV air conditioner, there's some filters for the intake of air. Earlier, when I described in storage that there's a protection method that you use from the outside, that's for ambient and external bugs included. So over here, I just want to share with you that there is a rather simplistic device here as far as the screen mechanism. It just swivels off as a hinge, and you have a washable filter. So please, I'll encourage you to consider this, cleaning this once a year. This is nothing more than running this under some water. I would probably say a soap solution would be safe. And then you're simply putting this back because this is filtering the air that gets compressed and converted into air conditioner and cold air. Folks, I just want to give you another brief image of what this table would look like when you're utilizing it outside. Again, I love the reference that this is my entertainment side. So when you take this same table, because they do make a shorter version if you choose to accessorize, you can buy this from the factory, and then it would be stored in your storage compartment. And then it cuts the depth to probably only about a foot. But this is the same dining table that is on the interior of the coach. We just remove it, and now we're mounting it externally to the same track system. Now you get to really see an advantage of when you would possibly use your 110 shore power. So earlier I referenced maybe a blender, TV. This is very much a coffee station, a toast station, anything that you need to plug in there. But this is super easy, super lightweight, and very easy to remove to and from. All right, folks, we're going to wrap up, and I just want to give you a little bit more awareness and instruction regarding the awning. Awning for me is one of the most overrated things in regards to, underrated I should say, with how much benefit it provides, but sadly often folks are not fully aware of some of the dangers. So this is number one thing I talk about with an awning is never walk away from it. You very much want to make sure that you are in the surroundings of your awning. It doesn't take much air to walk away and have this thing create a $1,000 headache for you. So I just want to share with you again, always be in proximity of your coach when you have your awning outstretched. So there's two functionalities to the awning. Right now it's displayed where these mounting poles are using the body and affixed to the body as its support. I'm going to just demonstrate before we show you how to unwind and wind this thing in, how this looks when we change direction. So with this piston, I'm going to first start by freeing up some of the tension. You're going to see that this kind of changes a little bit on me because it starts to let gravity take its place. I'll tighten this up for a minute. But in this instance, I'm going to lift this buckle that allows me to take this leg off of the coach. And on that note, now I'm just going to piston this because that section, and this is where I say I need to lower this a little bit, but this is where, if I was using it in this direction, let me get this a little bit closer. So this is where I would tighten this up, and there's two holes there because I think I alluded to earlier that you can use tent spikes. They actually are provided by the factory. So now on this instance, I'm going to unbuckle this one, taking it off of the body of the coach, and this is where I'm going to begin the process of taking some of the tension off of this so that I can get it to the same height. And then I'll show you how to, I dare say, disassemble or pack one of these things in. So on that note, sometimes, because you'll notice there's an LED light I'll cover in greater detail, sometimes I could use the light reflection along the coach to tell me if I'm close to accurate. I think I have some pivot here, so maybe this is a poor visual if this is tapered, but I'm going to give you a little bit of some insight. I'm a bigger fan. I talked about this earlier when it comes to the landing gear and most things manual. I'm such a bigger fan of a manual awning, or at least this type of awning when it comes to an electric awning. I'm going to build on the point that takes advantage that this right now, if my eyesight is right, this is tapered in this direction. I share that to say when you have a manual awning, you might want to taper it in a particular direction. Imagine rain. When rain is coming, I have the ability to adjust by these poles what direction the runoff is going to go. On an electric awning, and a different type of electric awning, because in traditional RVs, you have a wall-mounted awning with arms that pivot this way. In that type of awning, they have a system that's built into it that sheds the rain when it gets to a certain weight. In this one, there's nothing here to help you with the amount of water that can pool up here. So by adjusting one of these legs, it's going to point in the direction of where that water runoff is. So on that note, I'm just going to begin the process of walking you through how to utilize this umbrella, all for the protection of the umbrella. So as a starting place, I'm going to begin the process of putting this back together. So the first thing I want to do, and again, gravity is going to work against me. It's very helpful when you have a partner camping with you. But as I free the tension and you see this comes down, I'm going to walk around trying to remain in focus. But then the importance, and this again will show you maybe a close-up, the importance of when we're setting this up, the pivot. So as you see here, I'm going to tighten this up. And then I just want to share with you, after I tighten this up, when I begin the process of putting this back together, this arm swivels. This arm swivels and retracts and attaches to the front fascia of this. So there is a metal and plastic, I would describe it as a hip assembly. Again, another reference to a male and female that you really want to be careful. So after I lift this up, I'm going to push this one in there. You'll hear a clasp. I'm going to do the same here. Tighten this up. I'm going to lift this up. And what I failed to mention, folks, is this brand of awning called Fiamma is by far one of the best in the industry when it comes to the cartridge type. I'm now going to get a chance, when I describe cartridge type, that's the opposing to the rail system that is mounted on a traditional RV. In the cartridge type, again, I'm such a bigger fan. I have my tool out of camera sight. Let me just grab it here. I'm such a bigger fan of having a manual, and I'll explain in greater detail. This is typically mounted just inside the door. I'll share it with you. But now, here's the reference to Fiamma. It's an Italian brand. And this is where it doesn't take much mechanics at all to lift this. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. It doesn't take a lot of strength. Forgive the squeaking. But this is where I'm a much bigger fan of it not being electric, and I'll explain as it gets close to fully retracted. There is a little bit of adjustments that are required. I see this leg is not fully engaged, so I'm just going to make sure that I have this engaged. And my reference to mechanic versus electric has everything to do with the tail end of this. And what I mean by that is right about here, which I'm going to ask us to take a side shot of, is where I can't help myself, I use the analogy of a male and a female where they come together, because this one is very specific, the angle of where this is meeting the body. And I share that to say the following. On an electric system, as it's happened, I've seen this a bunch of times, when someone is having an electric switch that retracts this to the body, right about here is where it starts to put that motor into deep water. It starts to strain that motor because this last little section of what it takes, when someone has an electric one, I tell them to retract it as close to the body as possible and then go find your manual tool, because in almost all things electric, there's a manual backup. And in an electric one, if you retract it this far, I normally am going to encourage you to snug it up against the body using this. So in this instance, fully retracted, I unwind it, a lot less quiet, a lot faster, because again, I have gravity and the weight working against me. But the importance of having a manual one, again, has everything to do with right here, because this is very important to find its way back into that crevice, because if I didn't bring it all the way back to that crevice, because imagine an electric motor starts to give up its strength right at the tail end, and this protruded out, again, I have the risk of catching air, and air working against this might pull this out of its socket. We've seen it happen before. We had a rental client, as I keep referencing, in our rental fleet. We learned the hard way about what customers are capable of doing. In our rental fleet, we had a customer leave this extended a little bit, didn't think it was a big deal. When he drove off, enough air inserted itself into that area, and then it pulled it out, causing, again, a $1,000 problem easily. So on that note, I just want to refresh your memory. This is a much better opportunity to have a mechanical one than an electric one. I'm going to open this door. There is a crevice on the interior of the door that allows you to attach this to the wall. You can hear it snap in place, but that's where they're kept. And then the last thing I'll just quickly remind you of is my light switches. I have two light switches. This is my patio light or scare light. This is the awning light. If you'll notice that awning light extended to the end of the perimeter, which is pretty handy because you'll get a greater reflection off of your coach when that happens. So when you're walking back to your campsite in the dark, that light sometimes can be a beacon. Again, the benefit of having an LED light versus an incandescent is it's not going to attract a swarm of bugs around here, and that's very helpful when you're opening your vehicle door. Folks, this concludes the tutorial on this Safari Condo. Tremendous product, 2023 Alto 2114. Just as a quick reminder, we do this solely to be educational to consumers. Whether you buy from us, you rent from us, you go elsewhere, we just want the world of RVers to be educated. Please know we are a full functioning business. This pretty atmosphere tough to avoid as far as background shots, but this is a full functioning shop. We do all sorts of service, we do repairs, we work on all sorts of coaches. Alto in our business is only on the Durango RV rental side. So many of our RV rentals are coming here to pick and choose. The only one that we do not have in our fleet is a triangular shape or aerodynamic shape of the A2114. Otherwise, we have every other safari condo in our rental fleet for you to evaluate and sample before you decide to purchase one yourself. Please come on down to beautiful Durango, Colorado, in the southwest corner of Colorado, and see us. We're only 20 minutes from the New Mexico border. Hope all is well. Please reach out if you have any follow-up questions.